What is up, guys? It is Saturday. It is time for a very special deeper dive, our first Saturday deeper dive, where we're going to have the man behind it all, the man behind the entire Awesemo brand, and of course, top DFS player in the world, Awesemo here. I am Chris Spags, but let's introduce him right now. You know him as Awesemo. All of us call him Alex Baker. How you doing, Alex?
Doing good, man. There's been so much like afternoon baseball, and now we got like evening slate, MMA, NBA. What's not to love? I mean, this is like DFS paradise here.
I guess the one thing we could have used is probably that Askren Paul fight. I'm sure that's been tough for you. You're probably projecting it out just in case, right?
Yeah, I mean, whenever one of the Paul brothers is in a fight, you just bet on them. That's easy money.
Yeah, they're actually a favorite, which I think is
What?
kind of surprising to hear. I think he was a minus 170 at least before the show. So kudos to Jake Paul and what he's doing. I guess bilking people out of money. And honestly, I will probably not be paying for that show. Alex, are you going to be buying it? I think I may watch it through some means, but I can't imagine actually paying for it.
Oh man, I feel like maybe I got to because like there's some real FOMO here to see one of the Paul brothers fight. Like I was watching Masked Singer the other day, and one of them was on there. And sorry guys, spoilers. And I was like, oh my god, like it's Logan Paul. It's like these are the biggest celebrities in the world.
He was on WrestleMania this week too. Logan Paul was. He took a
Oh,
stunner from one of the guys and was like the special guest for a match. And yeah, good for them. They're making that money. I would not mind a little Logan Paul money. But one way that you can make up the difference is going to OddsShopper.Awesemo.com because there's a lot of ways out there you can make money using some of the tools on there. And one of the biggest edges in sports betting you can find is just getting the best value on different lines at different sports books. There's an even bigger edge in player props as well. Especially we talk about that a lot in the tip-off show. Dr. Ben has proven that many times over on the tip-off shows as well. But OddsShopper is a great way to get going with the free NBA player props tool that was created by this very man, Alex Awesemo Baker. Ways to increase your ROI are going to be very self-evident on there with the win percentage and ROI percentage tools. So make sure to go to OddsShopper.Awesemo.com, shop for the best lines, find the best bets with the best chances of winning. It's a lot of ways to make money for yourself, whether you are a Paul brother or not, at OddsShopper.Awesemo.com. And of course, make sure to hit that like button for us, guys. We're going to have 2 hours of content here with this deeper dive show, as well as Live Before Lock coming on after us. So make sure to hang out for that show and stay tuned on a day that's going to be a little newsier than it seemed, perhaps earlier in the morning. But Alex, any overarching thoughts before we dig into the game by game here of this 5-game slate?
yeah, I think the injuries are always key at this time of year. So we just got some big injury news before the show with the San Antonio Spurs. We have DeMar DeRozan and Patty Mills resting. That I get. I mean, those are some veteran players, and then Jacob Pertl also is resting, and that's like, isn't that guy like pretty young? Does he really need to rest? But I can't criticize the San Antonio Spurs too much, but that will create a lot of value. I know DeJounte Murray is always killer when DeMar is out, and the other big injury we're looking out for is Jaylen Brown is questionable with an illness. Obviously, if he sits, that's going to create a lot of value on the Celtics. They got a nice matchup versus Golden State, so that'll be one to look out for.
Yep. So there's going to be some news to hit on here, some news that'll come during the Live Before Lock show. Right after us, it will be, I think it's Greg and Terry. There we go. So a dynamic duo there, two men I enjoy doing shows with quite a bunch. You will enjoy hearing their insights. So stay tuned to the stream right after this show ends. But let's get into our first game. We have Detroit with a 111 implied total going into Washington, a 115 implied total on their end. And Detroit going to have a lot of the guys who were out yesterday back available today, barring something weird happening before this game starts off. But Jeremy Grant back in, Mason Plumley back in, Josh Jackson probably going to take a bit of a downshift as a result. Corey Joseph also back in. And Alex, in this spot, it does seem like some of these guys, I know you were a little high on the concept of Corey Joseph, the rate change that he's had recently playing in Detroit, where he's had, I think, a 35% assist rate, you could say conservatively, upwards of a 40% assist rate, depending upon what you're looking at. Usage has been higher. Is he the guy you'd want to talk about first here? Because your projection for him today, I think, jumps out the most amongst Detroit.
Definitely, yeah. Corey Joseph has really had a different role on Detroit than he did on Sacramento. It's so hard to keep up with these guys. Anyway, like when he played with the Kings, he was oftentimes on the court with other point guards. So De'Aaron Fox shared the court a lot with Corey Joseph, and then Tyrese Halliburton obviously is pretty much a pure point guard as well. So that really made Corey Joseph not get the ball, which he really needs to be productive. But he has been getting a lot of stats on the Pistons. He sat out the last game, but before that, he has a 37% assist rate over the last 5 games, 18% usage. For context, his year-to-date assist rate is 20%. So that's like an increase of like 36 to 20. So that's like 80%. That's like insanity, right? So like I feel like a lot of the pricing is going to be based off the season-long numbers, but it's just like a totally different situation. So how are you feeling about Kojo?
So I've bought in here on him a couple times, and I noticed the rate data too. So when I saw you say that, I felt less like a crazy person I normally would, talking myself into a guy like Corey Joseph. But I agree, it's a different situation here. You know, there are point guards in tow where you have your Saban Lees. I guess today we won't have Frank Jackson, won't have Dennis Smith, or at least I think those two. I think they're officially out now, right? But yes, less guys available overall in the backcourt that I think give you some degree of confidence too, where it does seem like Dwayne Casey's wanted to play Corey Joseph for the stabilizing kind of presence he could bring, and also just setting up guys for shots, where Jeremy Grant has had a harder time getting good shots as he's been the star player down the stretch. I think that's something that kind of opens it up. So I'm in on Corey Joseph. I think the question is, at his price point, do you get there a lot? And it seems like on FanDuel, maybe less of a priority play, but on DraftKings, Alex, we have Corey Joseph at 21% ownership. And that was, I think, before the Spurs news came through. So maybe that'll move around a bit, but it's a lot of people on Corey Joseph and buying into the new narrative. So do you feel like there's still some room to get there, given that there's going to be that many people on him?
Yeah, I think he's a solid play, but now that we have the Spurs news, I think certainly DeJounte Murray is going to be the point guard you want to look for tonight. Of course, that's going to be something that affects the ownership too. So I feel like Corey Joseph, especially on FanDuel, where it's more position focused, is going to be less of a priority for sure, but it's still solid. I mean, the rest of the Pistons look solid too. Jeremy Grant seems to be resting almost every day, but I think he's expected to be playing here. And at one time, he was the favorite to be the most improved player of the year because he has been a really good fantasy producer for the Pistons. So that's another guy I'm pretty interested in. The fact that some of these guys are out definitely doesn't hurt.
A nice price point for Jeremy Grant on DraftKings, 6,500. The issue with him really, though, is the peripherals haven't been there in a major way. The rebound rate for him kind of falling off the cliff this year, 8%, a little bit under that. The assist rate, I guess, is decent enough. So there are some ways for him to get there, but he's paid off, much steeper price tags before. So I think buying in there makes a little bit of sense. How about Mason Plumley for you? Because he rested yesterday, and Isaiah Stewart's definitely been clawing at the minutes. Today, we only have Mason Plumley in for 25 minutes in the Awesemo minutes projections, but Plumley certainly has been productive on a permanent basis on the year, 1.1 fantasy points per minute. Is he a guy you see yourself getting to at all, or does the fact that we have that San Antonio value we're going to talk about in a bit erase a guy like Plumley who's at a good price point, but not as good as a guy like Eubanks is going to be?
Yeah, Eubanks is definitely a huge value with Pirtle out, but Plumlee still is solid. The one thing that's been really inconsistent has been the minutes. So Isaiah Stewart, I think, by all the metrics, has been the better center in Detroit, which has been pretty impressive because Stewart's a 19-year-old guy. So wasn't expecting him to really make that much of an impact immediately, but he has. That's been pushing Plumlee's minutes down a little bit. But I still think that, it's going to be closer to a 50-50 split, but Plumlee should still see like a few more minutes per game than Stewart. The thing is, his salary just, I don't know how they came up with it at 4,900 in DraftKings and 5,100 on FanDuel. So that's definitely a price where I don't think there's any factors today aside from a killer matchup that make Plumlee look good, but I think the price is right.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense to me too. And Isaiah Stewart certainly coming off of a monster game on his own, though the price is up high enough here with Plumlee back in. You're probably not getting a Stewart today, even if He's got to get a lot of minutes here that are probably just not currently on the table. Only a 22-minute projection today on Awesemo. Anybody else here, Alex, you would want to take a stab at? Saben Lee, I guess, given the fact that Frank Jackson is questionable, by the way, to update on what I was mentioning earlier. He hasn't been officially ruled out, but no Dennis Smith, no Killian Hayes for injury management. Do you see getting yourself to Hamidou Diallo or Saben Lee just to kind of close the loop on these Pistons?
So Saben Lee, he should play the minutes Corey Joseph doesn't play. So that makes him a nice leverage play from Kojo. If Kojo was popular, he does look like a solid value at 3,200 on DraftKings. So I think Saben Lee is on the table. This isn't really a slate where I'm worried about locking up the roster spots early either, because the only questionable guy is 30 minutes after a lock. So we should have that news. So the one guy I'm not really looking to today is Josh Jackson. I feel like he had a big game last game, but Hamidou Diallo is expected to be back. Usually these two guys alternate on the court. So I don't expect them to play a lot of minutes alongside each other. So that should limit the potential of both of them.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially after the big day Josh Jackson had. Maybe a day to move away because people will see that on the box scores and definitely give him a little more ownership than he probably should get. But yeah, Josh Jackson, I feel like for whatever reason, Dwayne Casey's the first guy that he squeezes every single time in the rotation when he can. So yeah, Diallo back in, not the best. Let's talk Washington side here. And again, guys, smash that like button. Helps set a bunch here, compete with all the other things out there that you have to compete with as a smaller channel, a real mom and pop company here where we have one of the founders on the show here putting in that elbow grease that you like to see. But honestly, just helps out a bunch, keeping up with everybody else out there. So hit that like button and, of course, subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you know whenever we have new content going up for the NBA, for MLB, for MMA. Right before this show, the UFC guys always doing a great job as well. So hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Now, Washington, we got Russell Westbrook today as a play that already looks pretty highly owned, and we have that 30% ownership on DraftKings today. And given the fact that yesterday he was 41% owned on at least the big tournaments that I was seeing and was in yesterday, I got to feel like the 30% might be a little bit conservative. And I know that does sometimes happen here earlier in the slate, but with the value opening up, Alex, do you really feel like the 30% is going to hold through lock? Because Westbrook, just how he's playing recently, I think 6 out of his last 7 games over 61 fantasy points. He's basically having big days every single time Washington wins. And you got to expect him to pull out a win here against Detroit, even though only a 4-point spread favoring Washington. Westbrook, to me, I feel like the field's going to view him as unavoidable. And I don't know that I'm quite there, but it's hard to ignore what he's doing right now.
Yeah, he's been fantastic. It feels like he gets a triple-double like every single day, which is crazy. So this is a slate where you do have a few options at the top tier pricing. So it does have Giannis and Steph Curry. So I do think Westbrook is the best option of them. But Giannis isn't far behind, and I think the ownership is a combination of like the multiple options for spending the salary, and then the fact that the value up until the Spurs news was a little bit tough to come by. So let me run the ownership algorithm again, and we can see if it changes things significantly. But yeah, I think the price has caught up with the production to some extent. So 10.9K on DraftKings, 11.4K on FanDuel is that's pretty high relatively because the scoring system does not reward triple doubles. So I'm not going to go out of my way to get Westbrook, but I feel like if I like a lot of value plays, then I won't hesitate to put him in my lineup.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. That's how I've been viewing Westbrook. And honestly, it's been a thing that I feel like has been a short-sighted part here is that I haven't bought in on the curve for him so much. And I think with the games recently, you're probably a lot of people out there are going to feel like I do that, hey, you've been missing out on Westbrook. You got to cram him in today. But it's a back-to-back against a slower-paced team. And you have some competent centers, both Plumley and Stewart on the other side. Maybe they keep Westbrook off the boards a bit more. And that's really been, I think, what's been driving a lot of his value. He's had 15 rebounds a lot of games recently. So maybe there are some pathways for Westbrook to not come through. I just think I'm going to be at least with the field here on him today, just because I don't know how you don't at this point with what he's doing. Beal, though, Alex, going to be also very highly owned on both sites today. FanDuel in particular, the price point seems a little bit tough to avoid along with the positionality and all of that. It always goes along with playing on FanDuel. But Beal, I think, is sort of a leverage point to Westbrook, at least having a middling day, and maybe Beal has the outlier day. So how are you feeling about him? What's your confidence level? Because Beal has not been the most productive on a game-to-game basis, and still kind of coming off of the injury stuff that he had with that hip issue that took him out a little bit longer than you'd think. Beal's going to be well represented today. So are you on Team Beal or are you against him?
Somewhere in between, I guess. If I had to pick one, I'd probably say against him. But on FanDuel, 8,300 seems pretty cheap for Beal. I do like the idea of maybe if you're trying to play against people that have Westbrook, picking Beal makes sense because he does score a lot unassisted. So those would probably be buckets that Westbrook could have gotten if Beal wasn't taking him. So I think the leverage makes sense. The price point isn't anything that's too appealing, but he has been back to full strength here, playing his normal minutes. So I think any lingering injury concerns we might have had, pretty confident now.
How are you feeling about Daniel Gafford? Because he does jump out with the projections as well. And I think, I would say that based on the information we have right now, I would think Drew Eubanks, or if somehow Gorgie Jang ended up starting that game, I think both look like better plays to me than Gafford. But for tournaments, I know Adam has mentioned previously on the deeper dive during the week that he very much believes that Daniel Gafford will win somebody a tournament one of these days coming up here. The numbers have been better for him in Washington as well, though. Also, Alex Len has kind of taken an uptick in his usage, is rebounding, all of that. These guys still splitting a meaningful amount of minutes. But how are you feeling about Gafford? Because he projects better than Len and does seem cheap and does seem like he could be potentially a pivot to much higher owned value plays at center.
So I think the fact that this is the back end of a back-to-back is significant for Gafford, who's been dealing with some injury concerns since he's been in Washington. He got injured in that first game. He was on a minutes limit. I think in the last game, it may have been less recently that was announced, but they've definitely been limiting his minutes. The problem is I do feel like the minutes are less likely to be increased on the back end of a back-to-back as opposed to a day rest. So I'm just expecting him to go back out there, play like 18 to 20 minutes, and it's hard to get overly excited about that.
So you would definitely put him a good distance behind the Spurs guys and some of the other value plays we're going to talk about, just to confirm that?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So yeah, so that definitely a play that, maybe you get a little bit of, but I agree. I feel like the ceiling's still a little bit in question if the minutes can't get up a bunch more, but it wouldn't be crazy for him to be productive in a short burst. And he's probably going against Isaiah Stewart, who maybe he's tired for being so great yesterday. That's who knows. Let's keep going through the slate here. We got Cleveland getting 105.3 implied points, heading to a matchup with Chicago, 107.3 on their side. And it does seem, it's going to be this case for a lot of days coming up here. No Zach LaVine for Chicago. On Cleveland, it looks like everybody's going to be available for this one. So nothing too crazy here. You have more of the logjam of the big men with Kevin Love available, with Larry Nance, with Jared Allen, with Harkenstein, with even Dean Wade, who is better than people probably give him credit for in that time where there were no big men. Cleveland side, though, I really don't think a single player jumps out as being useful here. These guys were seem to me to be all priced for these situations where, hey, Sexton's been out, so Garland's price is up. Sexton's also been playing okay, so his price is still there when he's playing. Kevin Love's price is up now because he's been getting a good run. I think it's tough to make a case for any of the Cavs players, but do you feel any differently, Alex?
No, I agree. I think that it's hard to think that just a couple of days ago we were rostering Kevin Love as like the chalk of the slate, but the matchup for Chicago is fine. It's just that what you're saying, like the fact that Nance is back and playing full minutes and Allen is back playing full minutes, that does make it a little bit tougher to get to the other guys where they're replacing some worse players like Dean Wade as far as who's getting more of the minutes. So as well as Sexton be back, that's definitely too many cooks in the kitchen, if you ask me.
That is a reasonable way to look at it, and harkens back to that Adult Swim Too Many Cooks thing from years ago that I don't know if anybody out there even remembers that at this point with how fast the internet moves. Do you remember that, Alex?
No, honestly, I have no clue what you're talking about. Do you want
So
to enlighten us?
so it was like a weird Adult Swim thing that went viral called Too Many Cooks. And it was like an 80s sitcom intro where there was like, for some, like 40 people being introduced over the course of a 8-minute video. And then it turned out there was like a serial killer in the background of it. It was just one of those weird internet things that like was very viral for a week and then disappeared and nobody ever mentioned it again. And ever now, when everybody says Too Many Cooks, I can't but think back to that moment. So search it out would be my recommendation on the show. No DFS recommendations, only old esoteric Adult Swim bits. How about the Chicago side, Alex, where Kobe White went off yesterday? And I have some concern about Kobe White in the spot if we get Satoransky healthy. I think he benefited from both those guys, both Levine and Satoransky being out. And honestly, I was surprised Kobe White got as much usage as he did, just given the fact that he was on the court so much with Vooch. And we know Vooch, no stranger to getting up a lot of shots when there are guys out of a rotation with his Orlando days. But Kobe White was amazing yesterday. And the projection today, Alex, I think seems to show that it seems like you're on the same page with me of not necessarily being the hugest believer in Kobe White, at least right now with Satoransky questionable to play.
Yeah, actually, we just got the news that Satoransky's in today, so we can bank on that. I think that definitely knocks Kobe White down a notch. So I'm not that excited about the idea of getting to Kobe White. And I do think that Zach LaVine being out does help both of them, though, because like before, I was a little bit concerned that they weren't going to be on the court too much at the same time. But now, if both are playing well, I could see it. Because the alternative is playing guys like Denzel Valentine or Troy Brown or something. So I think there's opportunity. The price on FanDuel for Kobe White is reasonable at 4,500, but 5,200 you'd want him starting for sure. And I don't think he's going to start tonight.
So yeah, that's one where maybe the news could change and could be an added value to Kobe White. But yeah, I think we're on the same page with that. How about Vooch on this slate where we don't have a lot of big center pay up options and we do know a good portion of the field will be taking center value? Does Vooch gain an appeal for you at all here? Going, you got to think he's going to see a good amount of minutes going against Cleveland with their endless array of bigs that they can throw out there.
I definitely like the concept there where like we're trying to build a lineup that has a different like allocation of how we're spending the money. So if everyone's spending down on center, then spending up on center kind of gives you that unique edge. But the minutes have been a little bit inconsistent. I'm just like trying to think. It's like if Tice starts like he did last night, then that could impact Vooch's minutes positively because we saw in this game last night that Vooch did play more minutes. So that could be something to look out for. I do actually, now that I'm thinking about it a little bit more, Memphis starts they start Kyle Anderson at the 4, Joe Val at the 5. So a little bit of a smaller front court with Kyle Anderson. Cleveland starts Love and Jared Allen. So that would be even more reason to put Tice out there with Vooch. So I'm kind of talking myself into maybe giving Vooch some more minutes, but the price is pretty high. So what are you thinking here?
Yeah, I think it's to me, it's always interesting to go and try to pay up for a position that, the field's going to, find it impossible to avoid going to the value. And I do like the value a lot, but it does seem, I agree. Like, I think that not having Tyson there probably gives the minutes ceiling a little more safety. Like, they didn't play another traditional big besides Vooch and Tice. Like, and with those two playing together, they went to Thad Young as the backup center again, it seems. So Cristiano Felicio didn't get in until garbage time. So yeah, I mean, I think the minutes are more secure, but I agree. Like, you would want to know that Tice is starting because Tice has been pretty productive for Chicago overall, that he could definitely squeeze if he's, just the backup big, but he didn't play any backup 5 minutes at all yesterday, it looks like.
Yeah, I think that is one development that should benefit Vooch. And maybe the reason they did that was even because they wanted to play them more as well. So I think that makes a lot of sense. So I don't mind Vooch as a real contrarian play. But man, it's tough paying 9,800 for Vooch when you can pay like 1K more and get Westbrook.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's, probably an ideal world where you can find a way to get to both. But yeah, Vooch, 9,800 on DK, certainly a stiff price tag to try to get different on there. Yeah, Daniel Tice, I think also worth talking about real fast because he did get, a little bit over 20 minutes. So maybe the minutes for him have a bit more of a ceiling that he's not going to directly pull away the center minutes, but we have him in for 25 minutes today on the Awesemo projections. And we have a pretty decent value pricing on him. It looks like, is he a guy who'd be in play for you now that I guess his minutes are in some respects more secure than they were before, but probably a little bit less productive, just not playing straight five?
Yeah, I think his time in Boston this year should be a good estimation of how he'll do in Chicago with this setup, because a lot of times he started at the 4. So he's always a guy that he's a little bit mercurial with the fantasy production because of how much he fouls. So that makes him an interesting play in fantasy. So I think he's too cheap at 4K if he does start tonight. It had been Thad Young starting most of the games, so that was a new thing. So we'll have to see if they stick with it today.
And then yesterday, another starting move or machination that came as a result of Levine being out. Garrett Temple picked up the start. Today, he's still minimum salary. We have him in for 23 minutes. Do you see Garrett Temple being a value play you would be interested in? I mean, minimum salary, sort of hard to argue that if you are trying to get enough value in to fit 2 studs.
I think Temple, yeah, 3K, that's crazy low. So if you need one more guy and you only have 3K, then Temple makes a lot of sense. But I feel like a lot of the Spurs should give you all the value you need here. So it wouldn't be my first choice there.
All right, so that is the Cleveland and Chicago, and we got about 35 minutes left to live before lock with Greg and Terry coming up afterwards, so they will cover any more news. But hit that like button, guys. Help us get this video to as many links as we possibly can. It's Saturday. We're all here in the name of trying to get some good NBA DFS lineups into the mix today, into the wild. So make sure to hit that like button and show a little love for Greg and Terry coming up in 30 minutes or so. Next game up, we got Golden State, a 111.8 implied total. Kelly Oubre is supposed to be back in today. It's maybe a bit of a downtick for Steph Curry, whose rate does take a bit of a jump up in court time without Oubre. And I guess this lineup, Alex, I think the price points here, to me, not looking the most appealing on DraftKings, at least. Steph Curry, I think you can make the argument that he's a pivot point to a Russell Westbrook, so I could see the merits there, but just him getting a little bit less usage with Oubre in the mix, I think gives me some concern that I don't want to be there too heavy today, but he was shooting the lights out before last game, so you could certainly make the argument there. Do you find Steph to be a priority play and a guy you would consider as a viable alternative to Russell Westbrook?
He's always an interesting alternative, but when it comes to the fantasy game, like Westbrook is numero uno, and Curry, like he does a lot of stuff, but he doesn't rebound particularly well, which Westbrook is one of the best rebounding guards in the game. So I feel like when you factor in the matchup too, where Golden State is playing Boston and Washington is playing Detroit, Westbrook really stands out as a better option. But that being said, I mean, Curry has some of the best shooting in the game, so he does have a ton of upside. So it all comes down to like how contrarian the rest of your lineup is. If you have a lot of chalky players, and maybe you go to Curry. If you have a lot of if you have a couple of guys that are a little bit lower owned, then Westbrook stands out as a better option.
Yeah, I think that seems reasonable. And I think the thing with Westbrook is you're sort of getting the floor and the ceiling. I think with Curry, you're sort of paying for the ceiling more than the floor, especially with Oubre back in. So as a tournament play, I think Curry seems fine, but I would want to go Westbrook's way a little bit more if you can afford it. It's not that big of a price difference. Andrew Wiggins, though, another guy who I think to me would be mostly unplayable today if Oubre is going to be playing. He's sort of taken the price jump here as a guy who does get more usage in court time without Oubre, but he's been better, I think, for stretches this year than people will probably give him credit for. But do you have any interest at all in Wiggins? I feel like you could probably make the case for Draymond a little better at that price point.
Yeah, I think Oubre being back, I think he's a reasonable option. He only missed like a week or a week and a half, so we shouldn't expect any minutes limits. At 6K, I think he could be a play. But the more important thing is I think it does take away from the potential of some other guys on the team, like Andrew Wiggins in particular, and then guys like Poole, Juan Toscano Anderson, and Damian Lee. So I think him coming back just makes it a little bit tough to get to the Warriors tonight.
Yeah, no, I think that's reasonable. The value plays, I guess we can hit on with Kevon Looney, another of the center plays that are probably going to have a decent median projection, but not going to quite look as good as the Spurs value will look. Is Looney a guy you would consider at all, or does he sort of fit in with the rest of these guys where I guess if you got a little bit, it would be fine, but clearly pales in comparison to a guy like Eubanks or even Gorgie Jang?
Yeah, now that I'm thinking about this more, I'm kind of updating all the projections as we're going along. I think that Oubre coming back should reduce Looney's minutes a little bit. He's always a guy that the Warriors haven't really wanted to put on the floor a ton, but that didn't seem to be the case over the last week where he's playing pretty good minutes. But now that Oubre is back, it kind of shakes my confidence just enough that there's a lot of good options tonight, so we don't have to settle.
Okay, that seems like a reasonable perspective with Looney, who's been fairly productive on the year, but he's a guy I think you want to go to more on a slate where there's just no value at all to go to. And we've talked about, I think, 3 or 4 value centers today who are probably going to look like better plays, and even a couple guys we're going to talk about coming up in a little bit here. Tristan Thompson, I think, another one. Like if you want to pay a little bit more, go there. I think they're all a lot more appealing options than a guy like Looney today, but still may come up on an optimizer, so keep that in mind. Juan Toscano Anderson had a pretty big day the other day, and I feel similarly here to what you talked about with Oubre squeezing enough people that like Toscano Anderson's still in for 24 minutes right now in our projections, but to me, I feel like it's hard to sort of envision him having the same pathway to having that upside with A, I think that was just an outlier day with Draymond being available, but B, with Oubre taking minutes away, it does seem like the pathway is a little bit tougher. So do you have any thoughts on Toscano Anderson coming off a day that I'm sure some people will see and want to get a little piece of, or at least try to chase?
Yeah, I agree with you that with Oubre back, that should change Toscano Anderson's minutes. He didn't even play the last game that Oubre played, but Wiseman was in the rotation at that time. Toscano Anderson, they usually run at power forward with Draymond at center. So, this just all makes it a little bit tougher to get him on the court.
Yeah, so going to be a little bit tough for Toscano Anderson to have a ceiling. I think as a value play, again, another guy I wouldn't be surprised to see pop up in an optimizer, but not in the most ideal spot, especially if he does get any sort of vestigial ownership from that last big game that the situation changed. Boston side, a lot of ownership going to really all these guys. Jaylen Brown coming off of a monster day, that really an outlier with 40 real life points in addition to his usual additions of rebounds and assists and all that. Tatum, we know the upside there, but his price point is very high on DraftKings, maybe a little more tenable to get to on FanDuel. And Kemba Walker, I think, projects probably the best in terms of value out of the big 3 for Boston, with Evan Fournier still out, Tatum, Brown, Walker, but they're all going to be pretty decently owned. So, Alex, how are you approaching this one? Because Kemba, the median projection, I think, is hard to argue. It's going to look the best for him. But for the rest of these guys, it does feel like a Tatum or Brown finds their ceiling a lot more often than a Kemba does.
Yeah, I think this one, this is interesting. Jabari Parker is available for the Celtics tonight, but I don't think that's going to really matter. So I think sorry guys, with Brown questionable, that's going to be really the key to this, where if he's out, I think Tatum, Marcus Smart, and Kemba are all going to look like really good plays. If he's in, I think Kemba, the price point's pretty reasonable, as well as Jaylen Brown looking like his price point is pretty solid. So those would be the guys I'd be looking at more. So I think the Celtics, they're like kind of guys you can mix in aside from Tristan Thompson, who I think is a good play. If Brown is in, if Brown is out, I think you should prioritize some of these Boston guys.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And I guess if the Brown news goes on for an extended period of time, maybe he gains a little bit in appeal just because of the chance that you can get him in there. I don't know. You'd swap around that. I guess, do you have any thoughts on that, Alex? How you might handle the idea of you like Brown if somebody, is really into him and wants to hold on to that spot? Do you see any way you could swap around that if you just held on to Brown as long as you could?
Definitely. Yeah, I think you could easily swap to Tatum with maybe like a 2v2, because Tatum is about 1,200 more on both sides. So Tatum would be the guy I want to target if Brown is out. And I think you can make that happen if that news comes out.
And we got one more, I think, very crucial play to talk about that's not quite as correlated to the Jaylen Brown situation, but Tristan Thompson played some big minutes last game and seemed like the ceiling could have been even higher. Robert Williams out again. They didn't play the fourth quarter stints. He and Kemba in particular, two guys that were very upsetting to me personally, as very exposed to them, and they didn't get back in because Boston had just enough distance in that game to keep it close, or keep it rather not close. But Tristan Thompson, value pricing again for him today, not quite as cheap as a Drew Eubanks, but does seem like he should have steady potential. He's been rebounding like a monster this year, 20% rebound rate. As we talked about earlier, a lot of that was court time where he was playing alongside Tice, and that's certainly another effective rebounder. Certainly yielded a little bit to Tristan, but I feel like in the spot, Alex, I like Tristan a lot. I don't hate the idea of playing Tristan alongside Eubanks, but the ownership for Tristan honestly doesn't look that crazy.
I like Tristan a lot too. I think if people, like you were saying, they might be looking at the last game where he didn't play any of the fourth quarter. So if they look at that, they're going to really underestimate his minutes potential here, because he did play 25 minutes in the first three quarters, which, I mean, if you extrapolate to full fourth quarter run, is massive minutes for center. So I think the fact that he's being backed up by Luke Cornett makes me feel pretty good about him too, because Luke Cornett hasn't even been in the rotation. So I think that Tristan Thompson is kind of a 1A versus 1B situation with Drew Eubanks tonight.
Yeah, I think it's a very strong play. And 20% ownership projected on DraftKings for Thompson right now, less than that on FanDuel. So definitely some opportunity, Tristan Thompson, if he does have a more of a ceiling day, or just even sees that fourth quarter run and continues to be as productive as he was last game. Anything else for you on this game, Alex, or do you want to move on to Memphis and Milwaukee?
No, I think the rest of the guys, not too exciting unless Brown's out.
Yep. So watch that news. And again, stay tuned for Live Before Lock with Greg and Terry coming up after. Hopefully they'll get some of this Boston news for Jaylen Brown in particular, but we'll find out. Just pay attention either way. Next game up, Memphis, a 115 implied total going against Milwaukee, a 123 implied total on their end. We are going to get a good amount of guys out from Memphis once more. We have, let's see, Brandon Clark out, or actually, no, he's doubtful. I think it hasn't officially been ruled out yet unless that changed on the injury report. Doubtful. Anthony Melton, doubtful. Justice Winslow, doubtful. No Jaren Jackson yet either. So a decent spot for the bigs here to gain an upside. I feel like Kyle Anderson has shown the ability to benefit in particular from Brandon Clark being out, but also Melton being out helps them too in a weird way, where they have shared a little more minutes than one might think in a positionless basketball team. But how are you prioritizing Memphis here, Alex? Because I think there are some plays here that, Jonas Valanciuns, you would think could play a lot of minutes and have some amount of success, especially without Brandon Clark in there. But stylistically, not the best matchup against Milwaukee, given the fact that Brook Lopez is going to be stretching him out for the most part in the day. And he's not like Jonas is going to stand out there and shoot a lot of threes. So let's talk about him first. How do you feel about Jonas Valanciuns? Because that median projection looks pretty solid, but do you think it comes with some minutes risk?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, Joe Val is definitely not a guy that Memphis prioritizes, I would say, because he's one of those old school centers that he has good counting stats, but doesn't really help you win. So I think for fantasy, I mean, he's a good option because of that, where if he's playing well, he can get those minutes. But I do see Xavier Tillman as someone they want to be getting on the court a decent amount in his rookie year. So not overly thrilled with the Joe Val with all the centers as value. I might go to one of those guys. A lot of the Memphis guys look like okay, but not blowing me away here. John Morant, it feels like he always has a ton of upside, but the minutes isn't quite as high as some of the stars. And then the rest of the guys don't really produce much per minute, but the pricing looks pretty nice.
Are you interested in Kyle Anderson? I guess because he is a guy that does tend to go overlooked. And I think yesterday he had like over 20 just peripheral stats. I was looking at Popcorn Machine. I didn't play much Kyle Anderson yesterday, but I saw that he had a bunch of rebounds and assists, and I think steals and blocks too in that spot. And it does seem like against Milwaukee, there's a pathway for him to just kind of be productive, even if he doesn't score a lot. And they're honestly going to let him shoot some uncontested threes, I would think too, just because that's sort of Milwaukee's MO. But do you have any interest in Kyle Anderson? I think all these guys, to me, you could sort of talk yourselves into them, because a few of these guys are going to have an outlier day to keep this game competitive, you would think.
Yeah, I think Kyle Anderson, he's always intriguing because he's a pretty good permanent producer, but the minutes haven't been great recently. He's been averaging about 28 per game, and that to me tells me that they're trying to, or sorry, about 26 per game. And that tells me they're trying to prioritize some of the guys off the bench a little bit more than average. So I think Brandon Clark being out should benefit him, but it does seem like Killian Tilly played more than expected last game. So there just isn't enough there for me to really try to go after Kyle Anderson.
Is there anybody else who jumps out here? Obviously, Jonas Valanciuns, John Morant going to be the big ticket ones that people are going to be intrigued by. But Dillon Brooks, somebody that I think people may be curious about because, Milwaukee does give up a lot of threes. I think they do tend to try to not let the Dillon Brookses of the world get up as many threes, but certainly a pure scorer who can get there. I guess Grayson Allen, too, wouldn't be shocking to see him put up a few more shots from deep. And he's a 41% shooter from three on the year. How are you feeling about these other peripheral Memphis pieces? And does any of them jump out? Because they are not quite as good of a value play as some of the other ones that we've talked about and are going to talk about, but certainly guys who can have more of an upside just because of the situation and how it is playing Milwaukee.
Yeah, I think this kind of late season NBA is a situation where like you really need those injuries for guys to stand out as great plays, but there always is like one or two guys from a team that you don't expect to be in an amazing spot that you have performances enough to win you a slate. So I think you can sprinkle some of these guys in, like Dillon Brooks. He's definitely a guy that shoots a lot. So I think if he's hot that day, then he can definitely win you a slate. But it's just like maybe one or two guys that fit that criteria each lineup, and then try to fill it in with the stars and scrubs and the other spots.
So speaking of stars and scrubs, we have one of the stars on the Milwaukee side that's probably going to be popping up for a lot of people on the optimizers today. And this is one that strikes a personal chord with me because I got a lot of Giannis the other day, like an impossible amount because of what the power forward position was. And we had a decent minutes projection for Giannis, and it seems like definitely fell short. He played 25 minutes there, though the fourth quarter, that game was out of hand. So seems like he could have gotten to 30, but he didn't play more than I think 7 minutes at any stint. And it did seem like they were pulling him about 5 minutes per stint, and most of them throughout. So what is your confidence level in Giannis getting to the 33 minutes we have for him right now? Because if you have him at 30, I think that is, a somewhat notable difference, especially given some of the other value or the other pay up options we have and all the value we have. Like, what are you ranking your Giannis interest level in, and how confident are you in him getting enough of minutes here? Because coming off the knee issue, like that is sort of a risk area, and it's not like before where they were just showing caution with Giannis. Now there's a legitimate reason for them to be extra cautious.
Yeah, that's a good thing to notice because if you think Giannis isn't going to play his full minutes, that is definitely going to be someone you want to be under the field on. I guess I'm a little bit more optimistic there. Like I agree, his rotations last game looked pretty short, and like especially in the first half, they only brought him in with 2 minutes left. He usually plays 3 shifts per half, so that doesn't seem normal. But they were on like a sick run during this period. He was off the court, so that could have had something to do with it. So I do notice that kind of game flow was going well for them with Giannis off the court. So maybe that could contribute to the decreased minutes, or at least that's what I'm telling myself.
It's tough because this is a spot where I definitely would like to go to Giannis and the hope that he can get the minutes that are supposed to be there, because he looks to me, I think, just in terms of a median projection and also the price points, he looks like, I think, a better play than Westbrook, in some metrics here. And certainly at least a pivot point for that money that you're spending. But yeah, I think some caution here. Just from what I saw, I think there's some reason to be a little bit conservative, but it could be a tournament winning decision here if you play Giannis and he does get that full run. I guess on the other side of this, you have Middleton and Holiday still not quite priced where they should be. It does seem like they're still up a little bit from where they were in the court time without Giannis. Are you seeing any interest in these guys? It does seem like Middleton in particular on FanDuel, a more appealing play. But for the most part, these guys not entirely owned, especially on DraftKings. Drew Holiday under 5% projected ownership right now.
I think you can go to them for sure. Dante DiVincenzo being out I guess that's like the tiniest of bumps to the other guys, but the pricing has been up on these guys. Particularly Drew Holiday looks way too expensive on DraftKings, where they're kind of pricing him as if Giannis is going to sit and he's not. So I think I would look elsewhere from the rest of the Bucks.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page there. I just really don't like the price point for Middleton and Holiday. Middleton, get on FanDuel, I think you can get there, and never going to mind that. But I would definitely be not inclined to play these guys with Giannis with where their price points are. I don't know if you have any feel about that, Alex, but I feel like if you get a Middleton or Holiday, I just wouldn't want them with Giannis right now with where their prices are, because I don't see how they pay those prices off unless Giannis is just not playing a lot of minutes or just, underperforms.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, they're pretty. Like you have to be pretty optimistic about how they're going to perform tonight to get them in the first place. So to get them with Giannis, that's almost like wishful thinking.
Yep. All right. So same page there. And we are now on our final game, guys. So hit that like button here, because this is going to be probably the most important one on the slate. And for a lot of reasons, a lot of value in this game is going to be incredibly highly owned by the time the night tips off here. So make sure you hit that like button here, and talk some ownership here as well as we go. But this game, San Antonio, 109 implied total against Phoenix. Pretty big dog here on the road. And this total might be even worse than when I pulled it. But Phoenix, a 118 implied total. So they are a 9-point favorite. But you mentioned DeJounte Murray. I guess let's dig into this part first. One thing that alarmed me looking into the rates this season for Murray in court time without DeMar DeRozan, who is out today. LaMarcus Aldridge, I also put for this NBA Wowie run too. Taking out Patty Mills killed the sample size a bit too much to feel comfortable with. But in the court time without both Aldridge and DeMar DeRozan, Murray's rates didn't change very much, which I thought was perplexing and does make the most sense. It seemed to me like Derek White benefited a lot more, where he has 25% usage and a 25% assist rate in court time without DeRozan and without Aldridge. But how are you feeling about Murray overall? Because the minutes are obviously secure. He can be super productive, but the rates just don't tell the tale of a guy who's a meaningfully better play in a way that's actually going to be just a different situation than he would have in any given night.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a cause for concern if like the bump we're getting hasn't materialized. But when it comes down to it, I mean, we got to use our intuition about basketball. So DeRozan has a 25% usage. He scores most of his baskets unassisted, and Lonnie Walker has a lower usage and gets more assisted baskets. So that's going to benefit a guy like Murray, who has the ball in his hands. So I do think like just the fundamentals suggest that Murray is in a good spot. And I do notice that in games where DeRozan has sat, Murray's played more minutes than normal. So this is one where I got to kind of just go with my gut.
Okay, so I guess Alex, I hate pushing back on you in these shows because I know inevitably it's going to work out in your favor, but my gut tells me Derek White's a much better play. Under 10% projected ownership on both DraftKings and FanDuel, and just the numbers jumped out to me that he does see the uptick in usage, does see the uptick in assists that I would think would put Murray, he's normally on the year 23.5% usage rate guy. That's where he is in court time without DeRozan and Aldridge. Like, White to me just takes the jump here in a way that makes him look appealing, and it does seem like the field won't be there. So I guess the question would be, and even if you like Murray, would you play White alongside Murray? Do you think White is a pivot to / leverage on Murray? How are you viewing him here? Because I'm kind of shocked at the low ownership we have for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all just the price point where I don't know why he's so expensive on DraftKings, but he's 600 less than Murray. And on the year, he's at a 15% assist rate. Murray's at 24%. He has 22% usage. Murray's at 23%. So I guess that's not the biggest difference, but I do feel. And DeJounte Murray rebounds way more than Derek White. So with only $600 gap, I guess I don't understand like why he's so cheap. But Jaylen Brown is out, so that's some good news here. But I mean, I agree with the logic that Derek White should be good with DeRozan now, but it seems like his price point is already kind of high. So I might I guess I don't really understand why his price is so high, but that's the slate we have. So I don't feel great about it.
Okay, that's fair. Definitely gives me some pause about my Derek White exuberance, but yeah, the rates for him just jumped out again. 25% usage, 25% assist rate, and maybe it doesn't materialize. Maybe it does sort of acquiesce back to the Dejounte Murray more and as a lead point guard. But yeah, I think for me, I will be a little more team White today, but both definitely in play by any margin. We got a super chat a little bit ago, and we try to stay in the game flow here for the deeper dive because we got to make sure to get game by game and get everything in and talk about all the crucial plays. But Chris was asking now with a K, Chris Thomason asking Lonnie Walker or Pat Connaughton on FanDuel. And Lonnie Walker, it seems to me, would be the better play by a pretty decent margin. Connaughton certainly can be a tournament pivot, but like he's not benefiting from anything today in Milwaukee, whereas Lonnie's very clearly benefiting from something here in San Antonio.
Yeah, Lonnie Walker, I think, is a great play. Pat Connaughton, I don't see a ton of reason to play him unless he was starting. Britton Forbes, I think, is expected to start. So I don't see much reason. I don't feel great about Lonnie Walker normally, but this does seem like as good a spot as he's going to get.
All right, we got one other Spur I want to talk about before we get to the bigs, but Kelvin Johnson, another player who theoretically should benefit. Also, another guy who the rates don't really show any meaningful benefit to him in terms of anything, I think, besides a little bit more in the way of assists. But besides that, Kelvin Johnson, sort of an enigma this year where we've seen the ceiling, but it really hasn't been there reliably. Is he a guy who meaningfully gains an appeal at a price point that's certainly not a value play, but like, he has a ceiling in there and he's going to be not owned at all. So do you have any thoughts on Kelvin Johnson or interest really?
Definitely. Yeah, I think Kelvin Johnson is solid. So with Patty Mills out, that's one guy, and Lonnie Walker starting. Those are two guys off the bench that the Spurs usually are playing for pretty good minutes. And I think that, sorry, I'm trying to do all my baseball lineups here at the same time. Okay, so usually Keldon Johnson hasn't been getting a ton of minutes because they do run guys like Rudy Gay and Patty Mills for good minutes off the bench. But with Patty Mills out, I do expect that the rotation is going to be a little bit shorter and Keldon Johnson should benefit.
Yeah, so Keldon Johnson in for 31 minutes right now with the Awesemo minutes projection. So definitely seems like a guy whose minutes get more secure. People also asking about Rudy Gay. Rudy Gay only in for 20 minutes today, and I would agree with that number. I guess the one way that you could see Gay get more minutes is if they went small at the 5 and tried to run Gay there, but it's sort of hard to imagine that for the 8 minutes, maybe possible, but for the Saric minutes, I don't have any real feel though for Rudy Gay, Alex. I know you're finishing up your MLB stuff, but do you have any thoughts on Rudy Gay for the people out there who have been clamoring to ask about Rudy Gay?
I agree with what you're saying there, where Phoenix, I think Saric, like they could run out Rudy Gay and match up with Saric if they wanted to. The only question is, would they want to? So like they would have to have 4 other guys that they'd want to play at the wings and point guards. So the fact that some of these guys are out, I feel like maybe Rudy Gay would be more likely to fill in for like Lonnie Walker or Keldon Johnson. But yeah, it does seem like he should be able to get some more minutes here, but it hasn't happened in the last game where these guys were out. So I'm not feeling really confident about that.
All right, so now let's get to the big question that people were asking really throughout the entire show. Iron Mike asking in the premium Slack, would you play Eubanks and Jang together? And this is the big part here. Jakob Poeltl is out. Of course, we do not have LaMarcus Aldridge anymore, not on the Spurs, nor in the league after his surprise retirement there. But Drew Eubanks, been a really good player this year for fantasy, a 1 fantasy point per minute guy. I think maybe not the expectation for people who've seen him over the longer term sample where he didn't do a lot for the Spurs in previous stints. You also have Gorgie Jang, minimum salary. Drew Eubanks a little bit up above minimum salary. But how are you feeling about playing these guys together? Let's tackle that question first because should be enough big minutes. But I think the one thing for me would be what we just talked about with Rudy Gay, where like maybe he does squeeze a few center minutes away from Jang and that makes him tougher. But I think Eubanks, I'm inclined to think he's going to get the run here because he's been playing well. Even if you just do the box score chasing, been over 25 fantasy points the last couple games, just playing backup center minutes.
Yeah, Eubanks, it was interesting because like for most of the year, he hasn't really been in the rotation, but the last week or two, he's been like pretty heavily in the rotation and even taking minutes away from Poeltl. So I do feel confident that at least he's going to have more of the looks than Jang. Obviously, like these two probably aren't going to be on the court at the same time, so I would recommend like trying to avoid that combination. Um, but they are both really good priced, so I could understand if you just like the lineup you have so much with them both, but it does seem like it hurts your chances to win to me.
Yeah, and you are giving away 2 center spots then on DraftKings, which are, a center and utility, which maybe not the most ideal. If it happens in a few lineups, I don't think I would be mad, but I might be more inclined to make a group for them just because I think I'm much more of a believer in Tristan Thompson, and I think getting one of these guys with Tristan Thompson or even to the pay up options that we talked about, I think that to me is the more appealing construction. But do you have any reservations at all about Eubanks? I think the fact that he hasn't been in the rotation before, maybe not the best, but it does seem like he squeezed Trey Lyles out. And then last game, Gorgie Jang was available to return, but didn't after he had his shoulder issues. They just gave Eubanks the minutes. I don't think there's a lot of reason to have concern for Eubanks' minutes, but I guess, do you have any reservations at all about him?
I feel confident that he's going to get enough minutes to justify the 3,200 on DraftKings. Whether they're going to love playing him, I mean, they did rest Pirtle, so that kind of does tell me maybe they are trying to see what they have with Eubanks and Jang a little bit, because I don't feel like Pirtle is like old enough to the point where he's really a priority to rest. So I'm a little surprised he's resting in the first place, but I guess maybe I'm reading too far into it. What do you make of that?
It is a kind of a weird move, I guess, but the Pirtle, a big man, you never know how that stuff cramps up. And I also think too, honestly, just him getting gobbled up by DeAndre Ayton, maybe that's a bit of a confidence sapper. Whereas for Eubanks, you probably welcoming the challenge, you would think, just to get the start and get that run. But Ayton's been a kind of a monster on the year, more than people realize, because the minutes haven't been great for him. So I think it could have just been some combination of factors there where they probably think they're going to get their asses kicked, I would think, because Phoenix really does put it down on anybody who's not ready to win against them.
Definitely.
Any thoughts on Devin Vassell? Like, I feel like he's the last guy we have to hit on, and you pretty much have to hit on all the Spurs. And I feel like Luka Semenic may be the one guy we can also talk about, because it wouldn't be crazy, I guess, if he somehow ended up starting, because he does seem to randomly start even when it doesn't make sense. But any thoughts on Vassell or Luka, or the other Luka, to be clear, not the good Luka?
Yeah, when he said Luka, I got kind of interested, but Vassell hasn't really been in the rotation recently, so I think that's enough reason for me to try to avoid him. But I guess like the counter argument is Pop never really plays the rookies a ton, but this does seem like a prime opportunity for him to play Vassell. So he's not really on my list, but I think if you played him and he had a big game, I'd be like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And he does seem to be a decently projected play at minimum salary on DK. So you have enough value plays, but maybe Devin Vassell worth getting a little bit. The Phoenix side, certainly some ways these guys can have outlier days just because San Antonio is going to be less equipped to handle them. And they already have been a competent team. That said, Devin Booker at his price point, I don't know how you can get there without just kind of ignoring what the median projection is. Same thing for Chris Paul. DeAndre Ayton, I think you can make a little bit better of a case for. This is now a better matchup for him, going against Eubanks and a guy in Pirtle who's legitimately a qualified center of some degree. And then you have Cam Payne, who's been playing more minutes recently as Chris Paul's minutes have shifted down as a value. So those are the plays that jump out to me, Alex, from Phoenix. But is there anything for you that meaningfully stands out as a guy you want to try to really get to in a major way?
The one trend that we've been noticing is that the bench has been playing a lot more in Phoenix than they had been earlier in the season. So that does make me leery of guys like Chris Paul, Devin Booker, who have been suffering from that. And to have Devin Booker hasn't been someone I've been targeting in the first place this year because his numbers just aren't as good with Chris Paul. So I don't mind taking a look at Cameron Payne, but with all the value on the Spurs, I don't think he's a priority.
Yep, I think that's a reasonable way to look at it. And I think that pretty much covers everything we have to. So we got Live Before Lock coming up next. Everybody out there should be following at Awesemo_com as well as at Awesemo DFS. That is Alex's own personal Twitter where you can see all sorts of gems from his brain, in addition to sometimes just him being mean to Eric Lindquist, like we all enjoy here at Awesemo. But Alex, any other plugs you want to hit on here, of course, in addition to the tools we have at awesemo.com/join?
No, guys, just thanks for supporting the stream and the site, and good luck tonight.
And have a good night, guys. Follow me at Chris Spags. I forgot to plug myself on there. Stay tuned here on the stream. Greg and Terry coming up next, giving you everything you need to know down the home stretch. We appreciate you guys. Have a great night. Good luck.
It is the Awesemo NBA Live Before Lock show. I'm here with Terry again, and oh boy, are we both scrambling because both of us are total idiots with just too many things trying to juggle at the same time, trying to upload NBA lineups, MLB lineups, MMA lineups all at the same time, and I just have too many windows open, causing all kinds of confusion for me and my computer. Not only that, but I also ate way too much Chinese food before I did the show, so we've got a whole bunch of things going on. Terry, I know that you're in a state of flux right now, but how's it going? How's your weekend going?
Going pretty well. It'll be a lot better if Dean Kramer comes through tonight for me in my little oddball pick there. I got just a little way too attached to that play. So I'm uploading my baseball lineups here and should be good to go momentarily to talk about what looks like a pretty interesting basketball slate now, particularly with that FanDuel or with that FanDuel. I'm clicking on
How
it.
about that
the word goes
FanDuel?
into my brain, right? How about that FanDuel? It's going to be a hell of a play tonight. Yeah, with that Spurs news, I think is kind of interesting. So, all right. 150 lineups for baseball uploaded. We can get that out of my brain until I have to change them all later on. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting basketball slate. How you doing? Are you getting your stuff sorted out over there?
No, not at all. But let's talk about those Spurs because you mentioned them right now, and obviously this is the key source of value for the slate. Here's where I'm having a little bit of a struggle with the Spurs. They are clearly resting everybody. They are punting this game, right? They have no intention of winning. And it's really hard for me to project the Suns starters to play full minutes. We saw a pretty similar situation the other day with Phoenix where this is now, I believe it's the third game of a stretch where the Suns are going to be playing 9 games in 15 days. So we saw this the other day against the Kings. The Suns, it wasn't a blowout, but they won the game comfortably enough to where they didn't have to play the starters as many minutes as they normally would have to play them. So in that game, which by the way did end up being somewhat competitive, at least it wasn't like, they won by 30 or anything like that, but still, Devin Booker plays 31 minutes in that game. They ended up winning by 8, by the way. Chris Paul ends up playing, I think it was 29 minutes. 29 minutes in that game. So it's not to say that I think that the Suns for sure are going to win this game by 30, but I don't know that they're going to have to play Chris Paul and Devin Booker, 32, 33 minutes. So the Spurs side, I think, is a little bit more pertinent for DFS, but I'm not sure if this has been talked about yet. So I don't have the Suns guys in my player pool, at least not Chris Paul and Devin Booker. Do you feel much differently than that?
So I think what you're saying definitely makes sense in terms of the viability of their minutes, their overall minutes upside and everything that we care about with them being on the court. As we get into the back end of the season here, teams that are either in or out of the playoff race are going to be doing wacky things with their rotation, get older players like a Chris Paul, who's, kind of critical for them, some additional rest, get guys like Devin Booker, who's still a very young kid, but, these guys need their rest, and at least that's what we're told. So they got to find it where they can. And yeah, in a spot like this where they should light up a team full of essentially replacement level players or kids on the rise, that they're trying to get a look at here, I think it makes some sense. I always hesitate to just flat remove guys from my player pool. Like I'll always let Fantasy Cruncher get to bits and pieces of them, but it's something where if I'm like hand building 3 lineups for a 3 max or something like that, they wouldn't be in that kind of a player pool. For 150, I'm always willing to get some shares of most of these guys, as long as like the minutes and the rates and everything add up.
All right, so then let's talk about the Spurs. This is really the more pertinent side. I just kind of wanted to bring up the other side because I thought it was kind of an interesting talking point. But I mean, obviously now the Spurs, there's all the value in the world now that we have, let me get the full list of names of guys who are out. They have DeMar DeRozan resting. We have Trey Lyles out, Jakob Poeltl out, Patty Mills is out. So, I mean, these are 4 key guys of the rotation. So now the starting lineup, I assume, is going to be DeJounte Murray, Derek White. Those guys start anyway. Kelvin Johnson, he starts anyway. And then I think Lonnie Walker and Drew Eubanks are going to be the other 2 spots in the starting lineup. Not confirmed yet. That's just my best guess. So of these guys, starting with DeJounte Murray, how concerned are you about the matchup and potentially this being a one-sided game? Is he a priority play for you?
So, I mean, Phoenix has been a team all year long that I haven't really looked to run guys into. They're pretty good defensively, don't play at like the fastest pace in the league. So it's not appealing necessarily from that perspective, but just from the idea that he's going to get a gargantuan minute share here. He's going to get a ton of usage, have the ball in his hands, be one of the guys deciding what's going on the court, calling his own number when he wants to. For 7,400, there's a lot to like there on FanDuel. 7,100, same thing on DK. And the field's not with it. So the most important part of it, at least as of our last update, which was like 15 seconds before we started this conversation, I think there's plenty of room to get over the field on DeJounte Murray for what we're seeing right now. If that gap closes a little bit more, I still like it, but like it would come down a little bit. Right now, I'd be willing to just, smash through the field on DeJounte Murray just because of that leverage that's available there. Just get to a ton of that. 1.12 fantasy points per minute across all situations this year. And definitely this is not representative of all situations. He's going to have to do more for them tonight. So I think we can go there. I think Keldon's on the board in, kind of a similar fashion in that he's going to get a fair share of minutes and should look to get a lot of usage, whether he comes through and whether they start looking in other directions. If he's not really coming through and producing, that's anybody's guess. But for 4,300, I'm willing to take a few shots on it on FanDuel. I like it less for 51 on DK at the power forward spot, but I think he's definitely interesting on the FanDuel slate.
Yeah, it's funny. So, I mean, my first run when I just did, there was like, hey, these are what the guys project as. I'm going to run it through, see what comes out. And it's just, I got so much of the Spurs guys where I was like, I don't want to have like 80% DeJounte Murray. So I capped him at, I think 35% was the number that I put him at. Just as a maximum. So yeah, I'm going to be overweight to the field on him. He's going to be an important piece of my lineups, but I don't want to have him to the point where I'm so reliant on him to where it's like, oh, the Suns are up by 20 at halftime and it's already a tough matchup. DeJounte Murray doesn't really play in the second half because I do think that's live to happen here. That, and when we've already seen the Spurs rest this many guys, it gives me a little bit of pause that they're going to be willing to run Murray out for his full minutes. So that's a little bit of a concern for me too. But either way, those are just the reasons that I'm not getting to Murray in like every single one of my lineups. I'm still overweight to the field on him. I think that he's one of the better GPP plays. In terms of the cheaper options, who is the guy that you are rostering the most amongst the group of, Drew Eubanks, maybe Gorgie Jang, if you want to be a little contrarian, Lonnie Walker, of the cheap guys here? So who's the priority of the guys who kind of just enable you to spend up for all the stars?
Yeah, so pending any information on how the minutes are going to go between the two centers, Jang and Eubanks, I think they're both interesting. They're both on the boards. Definitely Eubanks on the DraftKings board is very interesting at 3,200, especially if we get some kind of indication starting and getting 28 minutes or something like that. Then you have to love that price. So I think it's kind of a no-brainer spot to go to him. 1.06 fantasy points per minute across all situations. In play for 3,700 on FanDuel. A little less so though, just given the singular center and all of that, with potentially sacrificing some upside at the position. But I definitely think there's plenty of room for Drew Eubanks here. You mentioned Derek White earlier, and he's only 5,600 on the FanDuel slate. So that's an interesting pivot if you're looking to get away from some of the Dejounte Murray shares, but still want to pick up a piece of this game. I don't know that necessarily that's a far enough pivot from those Murray shares that it's going to be comfortable from the narrative that you were talking to, though, where like they're getting lit and they just pull these guys. White and Murray might go together in that situation, and they just go straight to other guys. That's I don't necessarily know that we want to roster any of them, of course, or necessarily who that would even be. So yeah, there's some appeal in the Eubanks if you wanted to go to like a Devin Vassell for 3,500, just on the idea that he's going to get over 20 minutes and will be contrarian with nobody going to him. I wouldn't totally mind that. He's coming up a little bit in the optimal lineups on both sites. Dead minimum price on both sites. You get him at both shooting guard and small forward on DraftKings. So there's some utility in a dead minimum price play. There's always usefulness in that.
By the way, I did see somebody mention about projections and stuff, and where we see that in the YouTube chat. And normally not something I would respond to, but guess what? We have free player projections on Awesemo.com today. So if you want to see some of the players that we're talking about, maybe some of the reasons that Terry and I like them, you can go see the projections that we have on Awesemo.com. They're free, and there's nothing more valuable of an NBA resource and something to help build lineups than the player projections that we have at Awesemo.com. So the other key piece of news, and by the way, do you have any questions for me about the Spurs guys, or can we move on to the Boston news, which happened right before we started?
I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on the centers and just what to do there in terms of like, if we get news that it's just going to be a flat, are you treating them as like evenly distributed minutes at this point, I guess is what I'm wondering. Are you getting to any Jang?
So I am getting to some Jang. I'm assuming that Drew Eubanks starts and Gorgie Jang is the backup center. So I gave Eubanks the bulk of the minutes. I gave him 27 minutes. I gave Jang 21. That still makes Eubanks one of the top plays on the slate, but it makes Jang to me kind of an appealing contrarian option. Also going to depend a little bit on where the ownership ends up here. But let's say the starting lineup comes out, and which, by the way, we're probably not going to get until after all the games start anyway, but just thought process here. Let's say, and right now Eubanks is projecting for way more ownership than Gorgie Jang, right? Yeah. Eubanks is one of the most popular plays on the slate. Jang is not, and I think that's probably going to hold true. But so let's say this is what we get coming into lock, where we have Drew Eubanks is, somewhere like 25% owned on DraftKings, and then we just have Gorgie Jang picking up almost no ownership as of now, like almost irrelevant in most people's builds. I'm guessing, like I said, I have the minute split 27-21. That's what I think it's going to. I don't know that for sure, though. It could be 24-24. Eubanks could get in foul trouble, and it could end up being Jang who plays the bulk of the minutes. So I have more exposure to Eubanks in my lineups, but I'm also overweight to the field on Gorgie Jang. I think he makes for a very strong pivot play given the ownership gap between the two.
Yeah, and look, we've seen him break slates before when he's in that right situation where he's getting a certain amount of minutes. 1.06 fantasy point per minute guy across all situations this season, not seeing a ton of playing time anywhere. That's why he's minimum price on both sites. So yeah, I like getting to some shares there, and especially if the field starts trailing it, or if we get that news, hey, we're going to split these minutes down the middle, something like that, that would definitely rocket him up. It looks like as of the last update I had, Alex had him around 19 minutes, which still keeps him definitely on the board, maybe takes a little bit off the top, but we're waiting, and like Greg said, we're kind of making our best educated guesses at what the minutes are going to look like here.
All right. So the other piece of news that came out fairly recently, we knew that Jaylen Brown was questionable to play today. He'd been questionable ever since the 130 injury report, but now he's officially been ruled out. Saw some people in the YouTube chat asking, is Jaylen Brown playing? Is Jaylen Brown out? Jaylen Brown officially out. So with that in mind now, I think the Celtics are a really, really strong team to target. So Jason Tatum is now popping on a bunch of my lamps. Tristan Thompson is somebody who I was going to be getting to already. So the Jaylen Brown news doesn't really affect him all that much. But still, I think Tristan Thompson is one of the safest value plays on the slate. No Robert Williams. They cut Mo Wagner yesterday. Yeah. So now we have Tristan Thompson at a cheap price on both FanDuel and DraftKings. To me, he looks like the best overall center play on the slate. And then we also have, Marcus Smart and Kemba Walker, both of them likely to pick up a little bit of extra usage in playing time. So these guys are all really high priority plays for me. I actually have more exposure to the Celtics right now than I do the San Antonio Spurs. How do you feel about the Celtics with Jaylen Brown out?
Yeah, it makes it very interesting for them. I mean, it definitely focuses a lot of the usage, and we know that Tatum and Walker are going to get a big share of that, with Marcus Smart getting a little bit of it in there as well, and pulling some decent leverage on Smart. The other two are definitely getting attention and ownership, justifiably so. I think we've got a little bit of room to squeeze beyond the field. They're just going to be excellent plays now that we know Brown's not out there. It's just one of those situations where that's a pretty good quartet of players if you're talking about all four guys being on the floor. So they share the ball a little bit, cannibalize one another's overall fantasy production. So when all four guys are healthy, we play the pricing, the leverage game a little bit more. So 9,400 was keeping Jason Tatum a little less interesting on the FanDuel slate. 95, same story on DK. But with Brown coming out, now we can kind of escalate and project him a little bit higher, and that vaults him into extreme relevance. I think he's very, very high end on both sites. So yeah, I'd get beyond the field on Tatum. I'm willing to do it for Kemba Walker. I think Tristan Thompson very much in play for 4,300. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer spot on the FanDuel slate and on the DraftKings slate at 45. Particularly, given what you said, Robert Williams out and what's his face? Mo Wagner. Thank you. Scratched or cut.
Yeah.
Not scratched, cut. Yeah, to the bone. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense to get to significant minutes on Tristan Thompson here for that kind of a money. 0.93 fantasy point per minute guy, a guy that we've seen produce again. And when he has the minutes, he doesn't need the ball in his hands or anything. He'll just produce with counting stats for it. So I think it's there for him at that price. Easy enough to hit that ceiling.
And then on the other side of the game, I bumped up Steph Curry because of Jaylen Brown being out. And it's kind of twofold there. Number one, if I'm going to have a whole bunch of exposure to the Celtics, I mean, I'm going to need them to score, those individual guys score a lot of fantasy points. And I kind of think I want to have, I had a lot more exposure to, not a lot more, except I had more exposure to Russell Westbrook than I did to Steph Curry when I was building my lineups earlier. Mm-hmm. And then once I started to get a bunch of Celtics in my lineups, just for the added correlation in GPPs, I wanted to up Steph Curry a little bit. So I bumped him for that reason. The other thing also here is that Kelly Oubre is still questionable. He's missed the last few games. Steph, also something I've talked about a pretty good deal over the last couple of weeks, is just with the Warriors' place in the standings and how they've been operating. Steph Curry, we've seen him play a bunch more minutes. We've also seen his usage up as the Warriors make for a playoff push. So I like the correlation of getting Steph Curry with some of those Celtics guys. I preferred Westbrook to Curry earlier in the day. Now I have it pretty much split between the two. Does all the Celtics news, and obviously, or at least based on what we talked about, it seems like you're going to be getting a lot of Boston guys like me. Is that going to change your stance on Curry at all?
So Steph is a guy I'm always kind of willing to go out of my way for. I'm just a sucker for him in general. So yes, to answer your question, I was kind of already leaning that way anyway. I did like Russ a lot. It's just there's some room on Russ for sure, but that 11.4 price tag, I'd just rather pay 10.6 for Steph. And then you get the added bonus of, he's on the other side of that Boston game that we're going to be getting a lot of now. So I think that makes all the sense in the world. If they're going to go off, then they're going to need the other side of this game to run a little bit. And it should, there should be a decent amount of offense in this game running back and forth down the court. So yeah, I'll take a 1.39 fantasy point per minute Steph Curry any day. Westbrook has been ridiculously productive with his triple-double and is closing in on the all-time record and everything. But he's very expensive. The price is there on both sites. So yeah, I can definitely get to Steph Curry. The one thing you're giving up is the leverage, but you're saving money in order to do it. So you can spread that money around and either pay two plays that you can't get to with Westbrook. So you're getting the different stuff anyway. There's a lot that it does for your construction to save that money. And it's not like you're going from somebody who's we've got like a 13.9 leverage score on Giannis right now, where Westbrook is only around 4 or 5. So it's not like you're going from a guy who's massively positively leveraged. It's a slight change. It's a downgrade for sure in terms of that. But I think you're getting to a good enough play and saving significant enough money on both sites that it makes sense to do it and sacrifice that.
And then one other thing before we move on. Well, I have a couple of things in my head right now. I want to ask you a question about Giannis, but then also right there, you mentioned about, or somebody in the YouTube chat, had mentioned which Celtics guys are we prioritizing the most, because we did just kind of list off everybody. So I do think that we should say which plays overall we like the most. And I'm just going to rerun my lineups. I'm rerunning them as I'm talking here, just so I have an accurate view of what they are, but I'm pretty sure I know what it's going to be. And yeah, as they're running. So it's Tristan Thompson's the highest priority for me overall. Jason Tatum 2, Kemba Walker 3, Marcus Smart 4. Those are the Celtics guys that I like. I don't have exposure to other Boston guys. Are those the same guys that you like for Boston? Say, is there anybody else? And what is the order of priority for them?
Yeah, same 4 guys for sure. I would probably put Thompson on the top, despite the only getting 1 center on FanDuel. I just think there's a significant boom score probability on him and a lot of room for upside at that $4,300 price tag. I agree. You know what? I'll flip, just for the hell of it, I'll flip Kemba and Tatum and try and grab a little bit of leverage on the field. So it's very, very close though. But just to be different, since we're not giving the same list, I'll flip Walker and Tatum and then put Smart 4th. But it is the same. It is the same group of guys. That was just like a leverage reason.
And I have right now I have 2 more lineups with Tatum than Walker. So I just went based on how many lineups I have with each guy. So It's very, to me, it's tiers, right? Tristan Thompson's a clear 1. Then I have Tatum and Walker very close as 2 and 3. Marcus Smart, who I still like a lot as a play, but he's still 4th behind Kemba and Tatum to me by a decent margin. But those 4 guys, pretty high priority plays. And is there anybody else from Boston you got exposure to? I know I saw somebody ask about Grant Williams in the YouTube chat. I don't want anything to do with Grant Williams. That guy is I'm probably said something and I'm gonna put in the ether that'll I'm setting myself for him to go score 25 fantasy points to people to come troll me. But Grant Williams for the year, I'm just gonna bring up his I feel like he comes up a decent amount where I get asked questions about him, so I should just know these numbers off the top of my head. But yeah, so for the season, 18.6 minutes per game, averaging about 11 fantasy points. He's a very, very poor fantasy producer. So, you look at those numbers. If we basically have to give Grant Williams 36 minutes to expect him to score over 20 fantasy points, which is just a ridiculous expectation. So I don't really see much upside there. But is there anybody else I haven't mentioned from Boston that you think is worth getting exposure to?
Basically the rest of everybody that I'm looking at here are just total dart throws. Like if you wanted to throw a dart and hope that Semi Ojeleye plays, more than the 25 minutes that Alex has him projected for and somehow find some value, I guess at min price, but it's not a play I'm looking to make. And the rest of the guys kind of rate out worse than that. So yeah, I'm with you on Grant Williams. I don't really see the upside there. 0.61 fantasy point per minute guy across all situations, 11% usage guy across all situations this season. Not really seeing it. So yeah, for me, it's just all about the 4 guys we kind of focused on.
Yeah, and somebody brought it up in the YouTube chat that I'm going to jinx Grant Williams just like he did with Paul Watson last night. Which, so the Paul Watson game last night, Terry, I presume you weren't watching. I'm not going to assume that everybody just knows all my content all the time, but because I don't watch other shows when I'm not. I have a life when I'm not doing shows. I'm not watching other people's shows. Are they mentioning me? What's going on in everybody else's shows? So Paul Watson yesterday, I was looking at his numbers and going into yesterday, I remember this one off the top of my head. He was playing because they were very round numbers. So for the season, he was playing 10 minutes per game and averaging 6 fantasy points. And I said, that's not, there was so much value last night. I was I can't get to somebody like Paul Watson at that kind of points per minute production. And then Spags goes, yeah, well, just for that, I'm going to get exposure to him now out of spite. And he's probably going to hit 10 3-pointers. And shame on Spags because he actually had 8 3-pointers last night. But Paul Watson just the best game of his life. So yeah, now we've got maybe I'm gonna make because of that I'll turn Grant Williams into Paul Watson. Here's the other thing though. Grant Williams comes up, I feel like once a week in the YouTube chat where people ask me about him. He's gonna have a good game eventually, and I'm gonna poo-poo on him every single time. It hasn't burnt me yet, except if I've said it 50 times, Grant Williams isn't a good fantasy producer. Eventually he's gonna have a good fantasy game, but the odds are it's not going to happen tonight. It's just going to be eventually over time.
Yeah, it's the tightrope we walk doing this stuff, right? Eventually we're going to be wrong about this shit, and it's going to come back, and everybody's going to say, you idiot, you had it wrong. But yeah, I think you just doubled Grant Williams' fantasy or real-life minute projection from 18 to 36 for the night. So yeah, fire away. But I don't want it.
Yeah, and guys, like the video, also subscribe to the YouTube channel. For every subscriber we get during the show, Grant Williams gets another turnover. That's just how it works. So Grant Williams, and maybe that's a good barometer too. Like Grant Williams, if he finishes today with negative 60 fantasy points, be like, hey, I was responsible for that. I played a hand in that. So we'll go position by position, but I just wanted to one more just overarching question for the slate, because we talked about Giannis. You brought up Giannis in passing before. How comfortable do you feel with his minutes upside today? Because he's coming back off an injury. Last game was his first game back in, I want to say it was about a week and a half. Let me bring up his actual box score so I know exactly. But he only played 25 minutes last game coming off an injury. The Bucks were obviously very cautious with him. The regular season is not all that important to them at this point. So here it is. It was a 2-week layoff for Giannis. He came back. He played 25 minutes last game. So I do expect him to play more than 25 minutes, but I don't know that he gets to, 30 plus, 34 minutes. I'm not exactly sure what his playing time upside is. I still have him in my player pool, but I'm just about even with the field on him because I'm so scared of the minutes and I don't know what to do with them that I was just like, here's the safe way to handle this. Whatever the field is doing with exposure to Giannis, I'm just going to get the same number. My night is not going to be made or broken based on whatever amount of minutes Giannis plays. So how did you handle him?
So I'm willing to roll with Alex. Alex has him at 33 minutes, which is aggressive, but I think he's doing it intentionally because we're looking at the best fantasy producer in the game. And I'm willing to say that at significantly positive leverage if we get to him, if we expect him for 30 and change minutes, which is his usual. If we're assuming that they would not put Giannis on the court without him being healthy, then we can expect he's going to get somewhere in the neighborhood of this minutes projection, which gives him explosive upside for this slate when people are going away from him for that reason. He's going to be owned. I'm not saying that nobody's going to be on him and he's going to be like one of these, 2% owned guys. Like 30% of the field's going to be on him on FanDuel, like 20% on DK, but he's got significant upside beyond that kind of exposure, particularly just given the positioning that he plays. So I think there's a ton of leverage there. I get the feeling that that's why Alex is leaving that minutes projection where it is. If we see it come down, and we've seen this team be very, very precious to a fault with Giannis over time, it kind of makes sense, but they've done it too aggressively. And I'm thinking of last year in particular. They were going away from that more this season. But if you want to chase the narrative, then yeah, it makes a heck of a lot of sense that they would keep him limited, roll him from 25 to 28. Next week you see him at 32, and then he's back in his normal routine. I just love the idea of capturing that upside if people are going away from it. So I'm going to be aggressive about it, just like the boss here, and I'll go with it. If Alex comes down on him, I think maybe I'll follow it. I'm just going to kind of trust in what Alex is looking at here. So I think it's aggressive. I think it's a gamble for sure. So I don't want to push people too hard, like into actually doing it, but that's where I'm coming down on it. And that's like kind of how I'm seeing the nature of the play anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely stands I'm going to take that are going to make or break my lineups. Giannis just isn't going to be one of them. The other thing, too, is, like I said, I'm just going even with the field. If the field's going to have 25% Giannis, I'll have 25% Giannis. But I prefer both Steph Curry and Russell Westbrook as pay-up options, but I'm relatively split on the three of them. Which is there any one of the three that you far prioritize more over the other two?
I mean, if I'm following what I just said, which I'm going to do here, it's Giannis, just based on that ridiculous leverage score. So, yeah, again, trusting the tools from the site, which I'm not even running my models today. I'm working entirely off the tools from the site for everything that I enter today. Trusting that, I am going to stick with that play. It's just too much leverage to pass up, assuming that these numbers hold. So I'm willing to go with it.
Yeah, and I mean, by the way, if we were to find out that that Giannis is playing 35 minutes, something like that today, then yeah, he'd be my most rostered player, right? I'd be scrambling to get him in. It's just I have no clue what to make, and to me, it's just best guesses. So my lineups will be made or broken elsewhere. So let's go position by position. I feel like we've got all the injury news now, right? There's nobody really waiting on. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be crazy news that comes out, in 30 minutes, 2 minutes before lock, but as of right now, everything's seeming pretty calm. So let's just go position by position here, starting with the point guards. We've talked about a lot of the guys already that I'm pretty exposed to: Kemba Walker, Russell Westbrook, Marcus Smart, DeJounte Murray, Steph Curry. The only guy who I have a decent amount of exposure to from point guard standpoint that we've not yet talked about is Corey Joseph. And the Pistons team that they produced all kinds of value last night. It's not quite the same situation that we had in terms of value because the players are a little more expensive. There aren't quite as many guys out, but we still have Dennis Smith Jr. is out. Killian Hayes is out since this is the tail end of the back-to-back. Rodney McGruder is out. Sekoy Doumbouya, he is doubtful to play. Frank Jackson is questionable. I'm assuming that he is not going to play. So we do have some playing time and usage is opening up in the backcourt for the Pistons. The primary target for me of those guys is Corey Joseph. We also have Saban Lee to soak up minutes. Josh Jackson could be in the starting lineup. He could play a significant amount of minutes again, but Corey Joseph is the guy that I have the most interested in. Very strong matchup going up against the Washington Wizards. And Corey Joseph, we've seen him play relatively well as of late with the Pistons in the games that he's been active in. Yesterday was not one of those games. He was rested. But if we go back before then, and by the way, also just the kind of upside that he has and also the variance here, which is going to kind of exist with any team that's kind of random with their usage and playing time like the Pistons. But in 4 starts with Detroit, Corey Joseph, 41 DraftKings points, 22, 49, and 12. That is all over the place, but certainly for GPPs, that's an upside I want a piece of. So how do you feel about Corey Joseph, or is there a different cheap Pistons point guard you prefer to him?
No, I think he makes the most sense out of the group. I think it's the most reliable producer. He's priced up to 5,000 on the FanDuel slate. I think there are just plays that I would rather get to. Like I would so much rather just over roster Kemba Walker for 6,800. Even Marcus Smart. Well, Marcus Smart is a shooting guard. I've got this sorted through drafting stuff, but Kemba Walker at the 6,800, I would just over roster. I would rather get to some shares of John Moran at 68, I think. And then we're talking about the stars that we want to pay for and Dejounte Murray in that position. So I think if anybody's getting squeezed out, it's probably Corey Joseph from the majority of the shares there. Just don't really love it. But on DK, where you get him at point guard and shooting guard, he's less expensive at 4,700 in the overall against the cap. It's about the same, but I think there's room to like him a little bit more there. It looks like he's got more upside, more utility just in being able to move him around the board a little bit. So he makes more sense to me on DK. Generally, yeah, that's a great upside to be able to try and capture one of those guys with just standard deviation, coming just kind of broad all over the place. So yeah, if we can get some of that upside, we capture one of the upside games in what should be an up-tempo, fast-paced, high-scoring spot. Sure, Washington's it's not like they're going to come out and play a bunch of defense against them all of a sudden. So yeah, that makes sense. But like I said, I think there's just other point guards I'd rather get to on FanDuel.
Yeah, FanDuel and DraftKings a little bit different. Like you mentioned Morant there. Morant, I don't think is a particularly good play on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, it's different because not only is he cheaper, but also we need to roster 2 point guards. And just overall, with the pricing being slightly different on FanDuel, like Russell Westbrook being really expensive and a little bit harder to get to. Steph Curry, for me, is a little bit harder to get to on FanDuel. So Morant at a 6,800 price tag, I like him a lot. And then some of the other injuries that the Grizzlies are dealing with, D'Anthony Melton's out, Brandon Clark's out, Justice Winslow's out. So I expect a little bit more small ball lineups. And then also because Melton usually plays the backup point guard minutes along him and Tyus Jones kind of split those minutes. Morant could end up playing a couple extra minutes. That makes him look a little bit better as a play overall for the slate. But really more like you were saying, more favorable play on FanDuel. I didn't really get to Morant at all on DK. I think I have him like 5%. I'm not sure if you played lineups on both sites or just one of them, but would you have interest at all in Morant on DraftKings? But I do agree that he's really strong on FanDuel.
Yeah, it was more about FanDuel when I said it, and that's where I enter most of my lineups. I usually just look at DK to consider it for shows and stuff. He would be in the mix, just given that he's got a little bit of leverage on him, and he's got decent marks across the board at 7,000. But I think similarly to what I was saying about Corey Joseph on the other side, I think there are just guys with more utility in the idea that we can move some of these other point guards around the board a little bit where we can't do that with Josh. So he just kind of loses some of that edge, some of that upside for me. He would be in play, but I would probably be under the field.
All right. By the way, we did just get a starting lineup for the Bucks, and I believe that News God had said that Bryn Forbes is starting again. Let me just see the full. Yeah, so Bryn Forbes starting again for the Bucks. There's enough value on the slate that I don't think I'm going to go to Bryn Forbes here. He still, I don't think he's going to play a massive amount of minutes. We've seen him start recently, and still Jeff T gets minutes. Obviously, Drew Holiday gets a lot of the point guard minutes. So last couple of starts for Bryn Forbes, he only played 22 and 26 minutes. I wasn't expecting to start again this game, but now that he is starting, do you have any interest in Bryn Forbes?
Sorry, I was trying to get those updates muted while you were talking, and I failed miserably there. I don't think that necessarily puts him on the board. Just again, another guy for me anyway on FanDuel on the point guard spot. There's just other plays that I like a lot better. Some of these plays just have explosive upside, are appearing in the optimal lineup a ton. I don't think this is the spot that I want to save. So I don't think I'm going to be paying down to too much on the FanDuel point guard spot.
All right. And by the way, this is a little bit surprising. We just got the Bulls starting lineup, and Kobe White is going to start. So Thomas Satoransky, who is active, he missed yesterday's game with an illness, or maybe it was a back injury. Maybe it was a combination of the two. But either way, he was listed as questionable to play. Earlier in the day, he was upgraded to in. I assume that Satoransky was going to start because he had been starting at point guard for the Bulls for a little bit. Also, something that's been talked about a decent amount in the Slack chat about Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine's in the COVID protocol. He's expected to miss something like 2 weeks of games. So Zach LaVine's going to be out for a little while. But now that we have news that Kobe White is starting, by the way, Garrett Temple also starting tonight. Is that going to put you back on Kobe White? Because he was somebody I felt I was going to have a ton of today. I was on him a lot yesterday when he was starting. And today I was like, well, if Satoransky is going to be out, I'm going to get to Kobe White a lot. I was not considering a situation where Satoransky would be in, but Kobe White would start. So how does this change how you're viewing the Bulls?
Yeah, I think it probably does put him back on the board. I wish we had any kind of information. Did they scratch Satoransky, or is he just going to be coming off the bench?
Active, but coming off the bench.
Coming off the bench. Yeah, so I think it definitely is going to. It looks like Alex cuts Kobe White down to 23 minutes. I imagine that's going to jump back into the 28 at least, and maybe north of that kind of range. So for 4,500 at the point guard spot on FanDuel, he would go from a guy who I was kind of scratching off in terms of I like those other guys better to maybe that now is a bit more in play as a pay down option for me on FanDuel at the point guard spot. I still feel like most of the shares are going to go to those higher end options, but that's going to be interesting to see how that one comes out in the watch. So let me wait for an update here and see if I can run a crunch and see if I can bullseye the difference that's going to make.
And also Daniel Tice sticking in the starting lineup. His run in the starting lineup last game went absolutely that did not go well at all. However, I kind of think this is a better matchup for Daniel Tice. And we could just talk about the Bulls starting lineup here for a second, because playing against the Cleveland Cavaliers, a team that plays a whole bunch of bigs, right? There's Kevin Love, Larry Nance, Jared Allen. This is a team that does not play a whole lot of small ball lineups, especially when they have everybody healthy. So this is a game where I actually think there's a little bit of sneaky upside in Daniel Tice. I mean, also because the game yesterday, the Bulls got down by a lot. They need to get more 3-point shooting on the floor. So Tice only ended up playing 20 minutes, didn't play much in the second half as they tried to get shooters on the court, try to get back into the game. Spot here where the Bulls are actually favored over the Cavs and a team that plays pretty big. I would not be surprised to see Daniel Tice play 26, 28, maybe even 30 minutes. So he's somebody who I'm going to get to a little bit as a value play now that we know that he's sticking in the starting lineup. And Kobe White, by the way, just bring up his numbers, which, I mean, it seems like forever ago, but Kobe White did start for the majority of the season before Satoransky was starting. So we've kind of seen this situation, not the exact same situation, because obviously they had Zach LaVine for most of the start of the year, but we've seen Kobe White start with Satoransky come off the bench for a little more than half the season. And overall in those games, we saw Kobe White play 33 minutes per game. He averaged about 31.5 fantasy points. So that's kind of around where my expectations are. And the other thing to consider too is that with no Zach LaVine, Kobe White could play shooting guard minutes, and they could play Satoransky with Kobe White. So I don't even think this has to be a time split where it's like, 30 minutes for Kobe White and then, like 18 to Satoransky or something like that. Like, I think it's fine to say like, hey, I think Kobe White plays 32 minutes or something, and Satoransky, he could play 26 because they could share the court together. So I'm going to get to Kobe White. I'm giving him 30 minutes right now, and that's going to make him a very viable play for me. How much exposure I'm going to get to him, I'm going to have to rerun my lineups to be sure. I know he's going to be in my player pool, but I don't know if that's going to mean that all of a sudden he's a more important play to me than guys like, Kemba Walker or Russell Westbrook or anything like that. But
yeah, that's what it comes down to, is that decision point between, all right, am I going to these guys, or is there a way to spend my money wisely at some other spot? If I do pay down at the point guard, can I make up that production, that upside, that optimal lineup rate that I'm sacrificing elsewhere? And it's going to be really interesting to see, because, most of the plays, at least, some of the other ones that we've talked about already have been kind of value based. And we've talked about kind of starish kind of plays at the point guard spot. So it's going to be really interesting to see if there's a viable approach to even doing that in terms of getting, the best end of these lineups that we're making.
Yeah, so the other thing too is that Kobe White is still really cheap on FanDuel. Kobe White what was the price? 4,500.
Yeah, 45 or 46.
Yeah, so 45. I mean, I'm gonna have him projected close to 30 fantasy points. To me, that still makes him one of the better value plays on FanDuel. DraftKings was a little more expensive in the run of lineups I just did. I got to him in 15% of my lineup. So still guys like Kemba Walker's a higher priority play. Russell Westbrook's a higher priority play. Corey Joseph and DeJounte Murray, higher priority plays. But Kobe White is still going to be in a chunk of my lineups on DraftKings, even with the slightly more expensive price tag. So I have no problem getting to Kobe White now that we have news that he's officially going to be starting.
And did I just hear you right that you'd have Corey Joseph over him though still?
Yes. Yeah, I still
might put that the other way.
Joseph. So the other thing too that I think could make a difference, I have Frank Jackson's questionable. I have him playing 0 minutes and out tonight. If Frank Jackson ends up being in, that would take away a couple minutes from Corey Joseph.
Makes sense.
But yeah, that's just one of those things where, when a guy's questionable, for the most part, unless I have a strong read on it, I usually am viewing it as a 50-50. The guy's in or the guy's out. And I'm just kind of guessing based on not really all that much, just somewhat of an educated guess. But I just look at how the Pistons their season's going so far and the way that they've just been willingly resting everybody. And I just think somebody's questionable play. Like, are they really going to play him? Like, what's the point?
Is he out there begging his coach to play tonight? And they're like, yeah, I don't think so.
So it doesn't mean for sure Frank Jackson's out, but to me, it just made more sense that he would sit than play. So that was the approach I took. But the other thing also, by the way, the game starts in 20 minutes and we still don't have news. I would presume that we have news before the slate starts, but maybe not because the game starts in 20 minutes and we still don't know. So let's transition over to the shooting guards right now. This is a position I think is pretty different on FanDuel and DraftKings, mostly because Bradley Beal is a lot cheaper on FanDuel than he is on DK, and I think he looks as a much stronger option. So I have some exposure to Bradley Beal on DK, but to me on FanDuel, he'd be one of the just top overall plays on the entire slate based on his position, not so much on DraftKings. So what did you do with the shooting guard position today?
Yeah, it is just all about Bradley Beal at that spot. I mean, you do have, if you're looking just down the list for another name, even you go, decently far down the list in terms of our optimal rate. If you're sorted by that before you get to Devin Booker, who is the next biggest name at the position on the slate. In terms of like quality, we've got Marcus Smart also there, who we talked about before. I could argue maybe for Colin Sexton a little bit here, but it is Bradley Beal is by far the class of this position in a good matchup here. 8,300 is an absurd misprice. But Bradley, he's leading the league in scoring, at least as of the last time I checked. So I think that's just egregiously underpriced. Give me all the Bradley Beal, particularly if we're making the decision to move away from Westbrook shares to Steph Curry. Then I think it makes all the sense to try and pick up some of this Bradley Beal and claw back some of that Washington upside.
So Arcathelza is asking if I answered his super chat, but I don't have a super chat anywhere on my screen. I scrolled all the way up. So Tyler, if there's a super chat there, could you send it to me? Because I'm not sure what the question was. If not, I know that he's left us a lot of super chats in the past. So just at me whatever the message is again, Arcathelza, and I'll just answer it in the YouTube chat. I'll answer it from the YouTube chat. All right. So other shooting guards here. Once again, we've kind of talked about a lot of these guys, but like Lonnie Walker, pretty high priority play. Marcus Smart, high priority play for me. I do not have very many shooting guards I'm interested in. Like it's a pretty condensed pool for me. Is there anybody off the board at shooting guard that you're getting to?
So I mentioned as a tournament dart throw min price Devin Vassell earlier, right? And it's 22 minutes, but like just looking for differentiation, looking for an offbeat play. If you wanted to go that way, I think there's a story to be told where he gets some minutes and gets enough playing time to pay off a min price. It's not a play I'd be comfortable with and not a play I really am pushing on anyone. But if you're looking for like a tournament dart throw that's not going to be rostered very much, that makes some sense. I could maybe make a similar argument about Desmond Bane, but I don't really want to. I think Wiggins is somewhat in play, but now you're talking about a guy who's going to be owned and is at a probably fair for him salary at 7,000 on both sites. Mentioned Colin Sexton. Dylan Brooks is very much on the board, but I think he deserves at least being mentioned. And now I think we've talked about literally all the relevant shooting guards. Is there anybody for you that's kind of slipping under the radar for the public that I should have listed there that I'm not seeing?
No, I went really, I went really condensed. I have some exposure to a very small amount of exposure to Desmond Bane, but I mean, for the most part, especially because like Corey Joseph is shooting guard viable on DraftKings. And then we've got, Marcus Smart with multi-positional eligibility. He's a shooting guard. Lonnie Walker, who I think is somebody else, also multi-positional eligibility at shooting guard and small forward on DraftKings. I think that there aren't that many shooting guards to really like. And then even on FanDuel, look over there, like Bradley Beal, really good play. Lonnie Walker, really good play. Marcus Smart, to me, a really good play. I just don't see anything that I need to go really outside the box with at the position. So pretty condensed for me at shooting guard.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, some nights we just get nights that are like this, where it's a small slate of games. There's not a lot to talk about, not a lot at each position. And one position is just super concentrated with a couple really just obvious plays. And I think that's what we're dealing with here at shooting guard.
All right. So let's talk about small forward now. And once again, we've mentioned some of these guys, Lonnie Walker, who on DraftKings shooting guard and small forward eligibility, he's my most rostered small forward. I actually think this is a pretty different setup on FanDuel versus DraftKings. I think Kelvin Johnson is a much more important play on FanDuel. Rui Hachimura, somebody who I would not consider a really strong play on DraftKings, but then you look at him at just 4,700 on FanDuel, also where the small forward options are, it's really slim pickings. Hachimura is somebody who may be vastly different on FanDuel versus on DK. So Hachimura, how high of a priority play for you is he? I don't know why I couldn't think out of it. Like how high of a priority play is he for you? You for he? Did you get to much Rui Hachimura?
He for I very much top number one play. Yeah, that's a big spot for me for Rui. I think he makes a ton of sense at 4,700 at the small forward spot. We've seen him kind of just carve out a nice little role with that Washington team. He plays alongside the big two and just kind of takes his usage in his minutes where he gets it. 0.76 fantasy points per minute across the entire course of the season, but that's why he costs 4,700. So I think it makes a ton of sense. 36 and change minutes. By far the highest minutes run that we've got at the position, and another position that's just relatively flat in terms of like names to go to. The only real name at the position is Chris Middleton, and I'm always happy to get him in my lineups, so I can definitely get to some of that. But yeah, I think Rui helps us pay for a lot on the FanDuel slate, is very, very relevant. I would be on the same exact page as you at 5,800 at the power forward spot only on DK. If he had a little position multi-position eligibility, I think he'd gain a little bit of utility there, but he doesn't. So I think that's just, he's in play to mix in match and put into some tournament lineups, but he's just not a priority on the DK slate.
What's funny is, it just kind of happened to me. It was like just really basic phrasing, and I just had a brain fart and couldn't figure it out. It was the same feeling as, because by the way, like people have seen me, I talk all the time, right? I do gazillion hours of content a week. It's kind of the thing where just you're writing text to somebody or something, you just can't think of how a word is spelled. Like it's a really easy word, and I don't know why I can't think of it right now. That is just what happened to me. I was like, how do I phrase this question? And I knew what I wanted to say, but I just couldn't figure out the phrasing of it. That's pretty much what the synonym is for like actual real life. That was what it was forgetting how to pronounce a word.
Yeah, you get that situation where you're like, water? That's not a word. Water? Yeah. Word became a sound was a phrase I heard in some movie for that, which I kind of like. Word became a sound. It's not a word anymore. It's a sound now, and it just doesn't make sense. Anyway.
So one other small forward I want to mention that I have in my player pool on FanDuel and DraftKings is Mikal Bridges. He's actually the only Suns player that I am getting exposure to right now, and it's really more of a price point thing than anything else. So Mikal Bridges, who he's shown to be a pretty good FanDuel producer this year based on his defensive stats. He's also fairly cheap on DraftKings today. But just because small forward position is so thin today, Mikal Bridges makes it for me in a plus matchup against the Spurs, who are just kind of resting everybody. Really for that reason more than anything else. Just I think the price point is right, and it's just so hard to find very many small forwards I like. So just based on his position, I got to some of Mikal Bridges. He is overall my favorite Suns player today.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense. I don't know that I have thought about ranking the Spurs players or the Suns players rather, but I think it makes sense in going to him in that matchup. 0.82 fantasy point per minute guy should be out there pretty much regardless of the situation. Like I don't think he's somebody that they're going to be too worried about protecting in the situation that we talked about earlier. So you could even see a couple additional minutes beyond what Alex has him projected for possibly. The other guy that I would throw into the mix for small forward, I mentioned him in my article today, Denny Avdia, with Davis Bertans missing another game. Not extremely productive by any means. 0.68 fantasy points per minute. It was like 0.69, I think, after taking everybody out for this situation. But just enough minutes there, I think, at 3,800, he could stumble into some relevance and is going under in terms of the projection that Alex has on him for the optimal lineup rate on FanDuel specifically. On DraftKings at 4,800, I don't think I would really touch him. Maybe you can mix in a couple shares for some differentiation. He does have nice leverage on both sites. Would you get to any Denny Avdia in that same situation? It's kind of, the alternate Rui.
I can't. He's just such a crappy fantasy producer. I've rostered a bunch of Denny at the beginning of the year, and it just never went well. He has so many games. It's like, oh, cool. Denny played 36 minutes and scored 8 fantasy points. So overall, I'm going to break up. By the way, did you see the baseball news?
I didn't see what the news is, but I saw the
Twins and Angels game postponed tonight due to COVID. That is gonna make me have to change a bunch of my lineups. But I'll talk about Denny right now. So Denny's numbers overall for the year, he is playing 23 minutes per game and averaging 16 fantasy points. It's hard for me to give him more than. Even if I was to give him 30 minutes, which I wouldn't do in this spot, that would get him to barely over 20 fantasy points. So it's just not enough. It's just not enough production for me.
Yeah, and I think that's perfectly fair. That's kind of what I was getting at when I was saying it's an uncomfortable, not trustworthy 0.69 fantasy point producers. So yeah, for me, it would be a dart throw for some tournament shares where, particularly if I wasn't going to Rui and wanted to save a little bit of money at that position. I just thought it was interesting to throw into the mix. Are you getting any Chris Middleton, since we didn't really cover him all that much, but we did talk a little Giannis, particularly with the idea that maybe you're thinking Giannis doesn't play that much? Would that lead you to more Chris Middleton?
So on a points per dollar basis, I do not like Chris Middleton. I don't think he's in play on DraftKings, but on FanDuel, just because it's such a crappy position that's hard to fill, I think that just because of that, he makes the player pool, but not somebody I'm going out of my way to target.
Okay. Interesting. So that's more just got money to spend and a spot to spend it in for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And okay. I don't have anything wrong with him as a play. It's just somebody that I'm kind of neutral to the field on in terms of my opinion on him.
All right. I like it.
Any other, because I'm small forward, once again, just such a brutal position to roster. And by the way, Denny, just because he's cheap, he could go out on FanDuel and end up scoring 18 fantasy points. And that might even be enough for a high-end lineup if all the other small forwards just suck on a points per dollar basis. So if you really don't like any of the high-end small forwards, especially because Jaylen Brown's out, because he would have been somebody I would have gotten to a ton, at least for FanDuel if he was in. So from that standpoint, I think he just makes sense because he's cheap. Any other small forwards you want to talk about? I know we're kind of running out of time at this point.
Yeah, no, I think we've exhausted the list of viable small forwards at this point.
All right, so power forwards, the key one's Giannis. We've kind of already talked about him. Jason Tatum, already talked about him. Core play for both of us with Jaylen Brown out. The next guy who's most important to me on both FanDuel and DraftKings is Jeremy Grant. Strong matchup against the Wizards. And Grant, he's missed an extended period of time due to rest and other things going on. But still, he came back 2 games ago, ended up playing 35 minutes, normal usage, big minutes. So I don't assume there's any kind of restrictions for him, even though he sat out yesterday. So Jeremy Grant is my third most rostered power forward. Tatum and Tatum being number 1, Giannis number 2. Do you feel any differently than me on Jeremy Grant?
No, right there with you on that play. Wrote him up in the article this afternoon as well, just kind of seeking leverage. It looks like he came up in ownership a little bit since that point in the day. So if you're basing your entire afternoon on what I wrote in that column, maybe change your opinion slightly, but I still think he's just very, very much in play. One of the better options at the site. Again, given money to spend and places to spend it, I just think there's a ton of spots that we can go for. There's a lot of these good options that are just coming from the mid-range. It's going to be difficult to fill out a lot of the salary cap in some of these spots without, if you're pivoting away from some of the star plays, and then the entire public is just going to be rostering Giannis and Tatum together, one of the high-end point guards together, and getting some of these obvious value names in there. So I think you can gain from making some, go to Jeremy Grant here a little bit, go to some of these other mid-range guys, not necessarily at the power forward, but maybe start considering some of those mid-range mix-in type options a little bit just to shake things up on a 5-game slate.
All right. So now, and by the way, also trying to scramble to get my MLB lineups updated. Not something I thought I was gonna have to deal with, but during the, I mean, I knew I was gonna have to deal with it at the top of the show, but I mean, I thought I was all set there, and then apparently not. But here we do have a super chat here from Darren Unger. He's saying on FanDuel, Kobe White and Chris Middleton or DeJounte Murray and Rui Hachimura. I'm still gonna go with the DeJounte Murray and Rui Hachimura combination right now, even with Kobe White starting. Do you feel any differently than that?
Yeah, I don't think we saw Kobe White come up nearly enough. He came up nicely, but not nearly enough to catch over where we had DeJounte Murray earlier. And we just talked through Middleton versus Hachimura. I think we were both strongly on the Rui Hachimura side of that one for FanDuel. So, yeah, I would definitely go the latter in that one.
All right. And other power forwards you have interest in? Those were really the core ones for me are Giannis, Tatum, and Jeremy Grant. Anybody else that's in a significant percentage of your lineups?
Significant, I don't know if I would use that word, but I would definitely be getting to a little bit of Draymond here, just kind of as one of those mid-range mix-in. 7,400 I think is a fair price to pay for him. Not like exploding up the board by any means, but a guy that you can grab for a little bit of differentiation, not getting a ton of ownership. You could do the same with your favorite one of the Chicago Bulls pair here between Daniel Theis and Thad Young. I think I probably would prefer Daniel Theis in that, getting a little less ownership, and I think we have a little bit more upside and a lower price at 4,200, 4,000 on the other site. Yeah, those are really the guys that are in the mix there. Then I know Daniel Gafford got talked up a little bit in that Washington lineup that we keep going back to. It looks like maybe he's come down the board a little. Only a 19.5-minute projection from Alex at this point. 1.16 fantasy points per minute across all situations this season would be excellent if we could rely on like a 26-minute projection. For 3,800 on FanDuel, 3,500 on DK at the center spot, would you be getting to any Dan Gafford?
So, what's funny is I was going to talk about him as a center play, but he is power forward eligible on FanDuel and center on DraftKings. So I had him on my list of centers to talk about. But yeah, I think Daniel Gafford's a good play today. He's been a guy who's produced well over a fantasy point per minute for the season. The thing has been, the minutes have been really inconsistent, but now he's on a new team in Washington. He played really well in his first game with them, but then he injured his ankle and then had a really extended layoff. And somebody who I kind of forgot about until yesterday, ended up playing 26 minutes, scored 33.75 DraftKings points. And given that he scores over a fantasy point per minute, and I feel like he's played well enough to carve out a consistent role on this team. I mean, I gave him 22 minutes tonight, and that's enough to have him projected for around 24 fantasy points. So that's certainly enough for him to make my my lineups.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting spot, right? We talked to, I just talked anyway about trying to find some differentiation from the middle. That's an interesting spot to maybe make some differentiation from the extreme low end of salary and get to a guy who is a value play and could definitely show some upside. The thing that stands out is he does, despite the reduced optimal lineup rate, he does still have a pretty nice 32.5% boom score probability on the FanDuel slate, 21.1 from Alex on the DK slate. So there's definitely suggestion of upside. It's just the minutes cut at 19.5 that I get a little concerned about, but it's not like we're paying a lot of salary and we are looking for differentiation. So that actually makes sense. I think maybe you talked me a little more into him than I was seeing it the other way.
All right. And now finally centers, bring it home. Just a few minutes left here. The most important centers to me on the slate, at least for DraftKings purposes, Tristan Thompson. We've already talked about him. And then also we have Drew Eubanks, who is center eligible on both DraftKings and FanDuel. I think he makes for a really strong value play. More of a pertinent piece to me on DK than FanDuel, but certainly playable on both sites. So Drew Eubanks, who is a little bit different just because of the difference in minimum prices, and then also because Eubanks, because of the positionality, also able to play fit into multiple slots on DraftKings. But for FanDuel, how high of a priority was Eubanks for you?
So it looks like he's slotting in third on Alex's board, but I think maybe just given some of the other things we've talked about, I would consider sliding. Well, I guess third is about right? But I would maybe consider sliding like a Jared Allen up ahead of him and considering another pay up option in that space. They're ranked out pretty much the same in terms of the amount with which we're finding them optimal. Jonas Valanciuns is in that space as well. I just question, there is significant upside for the salary and we're gaining there. I just always worry about the extreme pay down options at the center spot on FanDuel. And if I'm already doing it a lot with Tristan Thompson, I think I'm getting to a lot of those builds from the value spot of paying down at center, I'm getting to a lot of those constructions anyway. If the 600 difference between him and Drew Eubanks opens up a ton, then maybe I would pursue some of those lineups, which is, we're kind of running out of time to examine that question. But it would be interesting to me if the public is a little bit behind on Jarrett Allen and Jonas Valanciuns. I would maybe consider pushing them up a little bit and gaining from the mid-range on those guys. But I think priority-wise, it would probably be Tristan Thompson up top there.
Yeah, by the way, somebody asked, do we have a starting lineup for the Pistons yet? No, the game starts in a minute. Why would we have a starting lineup for the Pistons? Also, Frank Jackson, game starts now in 30 seconds. No, there is no update on Frank Jackson, who's questionable, which, by the way, has, to me at least, a fairly significant impact on guys like Corey Joseph, Josh Jackson, Hamidou Diallo. Like, all these guys have to soak up more minutes if Frank Jackson's out, and that's just information we're not going to know until the game starts. Like, we're going to find out if Frank Jackson's playing or not? The second quarter, because if he's checked in by that point, he's active. If he hasn't checked in, then he's not. So, all right, that's going to take us to...
If you just see him in like a suit on the sidelines, you'd probably take that hint.
Yeah, we're just not going to know until he checks in or doesn't check in. Just the fun of the end of NBA season, where just we have no clue if guys are playing or not until the
I just
game
like imagining
starts.
like the lineup card, just like with his name scratched out like 14 different times. Like he's in, he's out. They just really actually can't make up their minds on a game time decision down to the wire. That's what I'm envisioning.
The NBA injury reporting. The only thing worse than that is 7-inning baseball games. But guys, that's going to do it for us. I hope that we were able to at least highlight some of the guys on the Pistons who are going to play. Like I hope Frank Jackson's out just for the sake of my Corey Joseph exposure. Or maybe Corey Joseph just plays really well in like 28 minutes instead of 32 minutes. But guys, I hope you guys have a good weekend. Also, if you have not done so already, please like the channel, subscribe to the YouTube channel also. And that'll do it for Terry and I. Good luck tonight, guys.